It's the longest running American animated sitcom, so get ready for a big video. Today we're heading to Springfield. This is every Simpsons character, good to evil.
Reversal, clinch, I say.
As usual, we're going to start with the most pure-hearted residents of Springfield and work our way down the morality spectrum. While basically nobody in a 30-plus season show can be perfect, these characters are still kind enough to wind up in the good. To start, we're going to give the pets of the Simpson household some appreciation, so our gold medal of good goes to Snowball II. While she's only one of several cats the Simpsons have owned through the years, she's for sure the most memorable. Sure, she might not have any dialogue, nor really any particularly striking character traits, but we place her at the top spot for two reasons. One, her bravery in saving Homer's life from a burning treehouse in Old Yeller Belly. Most cats are terrified when they're stuck in a tree, understandably so. So for Snowball II to have rescued Homer at great risk to her own safety speaks a lot to just how brave this little cat is. Seriously, it's unlikely that the average human could carry Homer unless they're as jacked as Nettie, much less a little cat. As for the second reason, well, honestly, we just don't have anything negative to say about her, which in Springfield is quite the achievement. The runner-up also doesn't have much in the way of negative traits. Santa's little helper is a good boy in every sense of the phrase. In the first episode of the full series, he wins Homer and Bart over with that good old-fashioned dog charm, and after being thrown out by his sleazy owner, is just happy to have a new family to stay with. As for why he's beneath good old Snowball 2, in the very same episode where she saves Homer from a fire, Santa's little helper flees the scene.
I'm your pal, I took you for a walk once.
While we won't really take points away from him for this, since we certainly wouldn't expect such a small dog to run towards a fire, we still can't possibly call him better than a pet who was willing to do so. Now, before we get to good old Ned Flanders, it's time to talk about his creepy little offspring, Rod and Todd. These two have all the good characteristics of their parents without any of the bad ones to tarnish their reputation. Rod and Todd are genuinely nice kids, and even into adulthood, they've still retained their morality, taking care of Ned into his old age when he goes blind due to loss of eyeballs. With their strong Christian morals, we're sure they won't have any problem sharing the bronze medal of good. Landing just outside of the top three is Ralph Wiggum, Springfield's least intelligent resident, but one of its most endearing.
I'm taking care of this goldfish.
Once again, we can't really say anything overly negative about Ralph. He's a total sweetheart who just wants to make friends and have fun. When anyone shows kindness to Ralph, he returns it tenfold, seen most prominently during his time pining after Lisa, even going as far as to get her tickets to Krusty the Clown's 29th anniversary show. That said, if we had to pinpoint why he's outside of the podium, it'd be his incompetence. Ralph is never malicious, but he's often reckless, and in the future, when he becomes a police officer with numerous clones of himself, this could definitely lead to some trouble. Again, it's no moral dilemma, but it's the closest anyone has come to actually causing trouble so far. Still, Ralph is a pure kid, and he definitely deserves a high spot on our list. It's time to say hi diddly ho to our next neighborino, Ned Flanders. While we knew for certain Ned would be on the higher end of our list, placing him specifically proved to be a bit of a challenge. On one hand, Ned has shown without a doubt the most generosity and kindness out of anyone in the show. He's always happy to help Homer and the gang with whatever they need, even if it's at his own expense. From letting everyone use his bomb shelter during a supposed comet falling from the sky, even down to insisting that he himself leave when it becomes too overcrowded, Ned is as self-sacrificial as they come.
I want you to shoot Daddy if he tries to get back in.
He's also deeply caring towards others. In one episode, he takes the Simpsons kids under his roof as a foster parent and shows great patience and attentiveness with them, especially little Maggie. And we can't ignore his care for his family, who he cherishes deeply even well into adulthood. In the aforementioned episode where Ned loses his eyes, he's still accepting of his boys despite their alternative lifestyles. That said, while Ned is genuinely an amazing person, he's also flawed. He's been shown to have a bit of a superiority complex in the later seasons and can be envious when someone else is viewed as the good guy of Springfield. And while he does have an incredibly long fuse, when he finally does lose his temper, his roasts will cause more devastation than a full-on hurricane.
You ugly, hate-filled man.
Hey, I may be ugly and hate-filled, but what was the third thing you said?
Finally, his overzealous nature in regards to Christianity is a little much sometimes, mainly when it comes to forcing his beliefs onto others. This usually doesn't get too bad, but in one episode when Todd expresses doubt in his faith due to his grief over Maude, Flanders sends him away to live with the Simpsons, punishing him instead of helping process his grief. It just goes to show that even the best people have their worst moments, but thankfully, these slip-ups are few and far between for Ned. The fact is that he's as forgiving and friendly of a guy as they come, and his kind-hearted golden rule mentality earns him a high spot on our list. Up next, we have Springfield's favorite medical practitioner, Dr. Hibert. With that wholesome, infectious laugh you hear pretty much anytime he appears,
I'll show myself out.
how could Dr. Hibert not be a good guy? He's never shy to provide care for the people of Springfield, and you can bet he'll have a lollipop to spare when the need arises. The worst we could say about him is that while he's a highly legitimate and caring doctor, he sometimes implies some shady medical practices. For example, one time he offered Marge free prescriptions in return for her real estate advice. But honestly, with how expensive healthcare in the US is, I'm personally not going to fault him much for that. If the FBI's watching though, that was a joke. Now we finally move to Ned's dearly departed wife, Maude Flanders. Like her husband and sons, Maude is basically the essence of a good Christian. She's kind, generous, and does her best to support both her family and the local community, and throughout her whole life proved that she'd basically never hurt a fly. That said, emphasis on throughout her whole life. In the season 29 finale, Flanders' Ladder, her ghost visits Bart in a coma and reveals that she actually wants vengeance on Homer, who she sees as being responsible for her death, which, frankly, isn't a ridiculous conclusion.
Power of Homer sucks compels you.
We're not going to pretend that being angry at someone for literally killing you isn't valid, and the episode was kind of uncertain about whether the ending was a dream or not, but considering that Maude presumably went to heaven, you'd think she'd have plenty of good things to focus on instead. That vindictiveness, while understandable, makes her our lowest character so far. Next up, we have the purest of the Simpson family, Maggie Simpson. Normally, just being a baby would be enough to give Maggie a high spot on our list, but due to a certain football head-shaped world dominator baby in training, we have to clarify why Maggie is this high. While Maggie can cause chaos in Springfield, most notably when she shot Mr. Burns, she's usually a force of pure good who just happens to have a few too many deadly weapons within reach. As for her good deeds, she saved Homer and Bart from Russ Cargill in the Simpsons movie by crushing the ladder with a loose boulder, and of course we can't forget her being willing to give Mr. Burns his childhood teddy bear back, even though she very well could have kept it, as we saw from their legendary tug-of-war match. Maggie is a national treasure, and we'd say she must be protected at all costs, but I'm starting to think she's got that covered. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree either, because next up is Marge Simpson. As Homer's devoted wife, Marge is certainly the better half of the two. She's smarter, more disciplined, and even stronger than her husband, and she uses those traits to tirelessly work for the good of her family. Whether it's cleaning up their messes or just smacking a spider Homer saw in his car keys,
You did the right thing by telling me. Shoo, get out of here.
Marge is pretty much entirely characterized by her deep maternal love for her family, and to be clear, we mean that as a compliment. However, that's not to say that Marge is without her flaws. While she's typically devoted to supporting her family, when she is given a position of power, influence, or status, she can often go off the deep end. This can go from being a bit snooty when she's invited to join a country club in scenes from the class struggle in Springfield, to abusing her authority and power in episodes like The Strong Arms of the Maw, which has an infamous joke where Marge forces herself onto Homer.
I wasn't asking.
While it's not enough to outweigh her good traits, and by and large, she's still way more caring and forgiving of a person than she needs to be, Marge loses some points for those blatant flaws in her character. We'd love to put her higher, but seriously, that joke loses her a lot of points. Like, what the heck was that, man?
Got a competition tomorrow. I could use a good luck snuggle.
Next, we have Springfield Elementary's less prominent nerd character, Martin Prince. While he's hardly a main character, Martin's few appearances paint him as, albeit socially inept, a pretty decent kid all around. He follows the rules to a T and tries to get his classmates to do the same, but if the season 2 episode Bart gets an F was anything to go by, the poor guy really just wants friends more than anything else. He was even willing to help Bart learn how to properly study in exchange for advice on how to be cool, though once he temporarily did, he sort of flaked on Bart. We'll have to dock him some points for that. Speaking of Springfield Elementary, next we have Bart's new teacher, Miss Peyton. While we haven't seen all that much of her yet, she's made a few appearances since her debut in season 33, in which she saved Bart from drowning in a swimming pool. Saving a kid's life is worth some big points, as is her genuine effort to be as good a teacher as possible. Now it's time to talk about one of my personal favorite recurring characters, Hans Moleman. Despite the self-described agonizing pain in which he lives every day, Moleman is one of the most genuinely decent people in Springfield.
Oh, thank goodness, rescue dogs.
This guy has some of the worst luck imaginable. Despite his appearance, he's only 31 years old. Later in the show, it's revealed that he was actually mutated by one of the many bits of radioactive material Homer's tossed out over the years. But despite his poor luck, he's still always willing to help out around town, whether it's running his iconic Mole Man in the morning radio show or dressing as Bart to fill the void in the Simpson household, which shows that he doesn't hold a grudge against Homer. Even when Mole Man gets angry, it's not exactly unjustified. The only time he's maliciously acted towards another person was this one deleted scene scene where he robs God at gunpoint, and like, it's not like God is gonna get hurt by a gunshot wound anyway. Moleman was just chasing that bag, and even those of us who are Christians won't blame him for that.
Now hand over the rest of it.
Well, there's also the fact that there's a race of earthquake-creating mole people living under Springfield who look very suspiciously like Moleman. Were he not, though, we're sure Moleman wouldn't maliciously cause a natural disaster, and even if he would, he'd probably be way too unlucky to pull it off. Following Moleman is the only guy whose bad luck might rival even his, Bumblebee Man. A recurring gag character, he's the star of a Spanish TV show where he's constantly on the wrong end of some hilarious slapstick comedy. It's later revealed in the episode, 22 Short Films About Springfield, that he has a wife and a pet chihuahua, which really recontextualizes his work. What we saw once as a goofball hamming it up for a TV show, we now see as a clumsy, stressed out man who's using his admittedly unconventional gifts to provide for his family, even if his wife divorced him as soon as she was introduced. No es bueno indeed, Bumblebee Man. But don't worry, tu es bueno. Never change, except maybe a little less of that self-destructive clumsiness, just for your own good. Next is a man who needs no introduction. He's Duffman!
Duffman knows it's always time for a refreshing dog.
Well, okay, despite his pretty iconic voice and character design, Duffman is less of a character and more of a way of life. There really isn't much to say about Duffman, but if you're ever in need of a beer, you can count on him to help you out. But while he's a nice and well-meaning guy, there are a lot of alcoholics in Springfield, so his line of work might not be doing as much good as he'd like you to believe. Sharing the next spot are Homer's buddies, Wenny and Carl. While neither of them have gotten a ton of focus in the series, their friendship with each other and the community are enough to place them squarely in the good section of our list. There really isn't much to say about these two, save for the fact that they're loyal friends who generally treat others and each other well. They're good people, especially Lenny. Why else would Marge have a prayer shrine to him? I'm just so glad he's okay. Next up, we're giving Homer's half-brother, Herb Powell, a quick mention. While he only appears in a couple of episodes, we see enough of Herb to conclude that he's actually a super nice guy. They could have easily gone the Frank Grimes route of making him resentful of his more slobby brother, but even after Homer completely bankrupts him with his over-the-top car idea, Herb forgives him and still treats him with dignity and respect. We hope he's doing well these days. Maybe in the Simpsons universe, he has a TV sitcom of his own.
Disco Stew is stepping into the next spot.
He's one of the most minor supporting characters of the bunch, not really having much of a fleshed out character even compared to the other gag characters. Nonetheless, we still feel like he deserves a positive mention for the sheer friendliness he exudes every time he's on screen.
Disco Stew always gets down, baby.
He's a bit of a flirt, sure, but with an outfit like that, how could you not be? It's basically a public service at that point. Despite how some board games might describe him, Milhouse is the furthest thing from a dud. Bart's best friend is by far the nicer and less mischievous of the two, though he does usually go along with Bart's pranks and other schemes. Milhouse is really just a ride-or-die buddy who's someone you can count on to be there. He gets extra points for his loyalty to Bart, despite Bart not really doing much to warrant it, and sometimes doing plenty to have the opposite effect. Speaking of which, now this might be a little divisive, but we're returning to the Simpson family with a double entry. Lisa Simpson and Bart Simpson are next. Not sure if this is a hot take, but while Lisa is portrayed as the more moral and well-behaved of the two kids, these two are both equally flawed. Lisa, for all of her good morals, often comes across as hypocritical. She frequently forces her beliefs onto others and takes her activism way too far at times. In Lisa the Vegetarian, she ruins Homer's barbecue, something that he, along with the whole town, was looking forward to. And she knew it, and tries to antagonize Homer for serving meat.
I'm going to my room.
That's it. Go to your room.
We do feel for Lisa's desire to be both accepted and a genuinely good person, and to her credit, she's usually willing to turn around when she discovers she's wronged someone. Then there's Bart, who, while he's certainly worse behaved than Lisa, isn't any less of a good kid nor a flawed one. Bart is constantly pranking people, getting in all kinds of trouble that ranges from vandalism to shoplifting. Regardless, Bart is never genuinely out to harm anyone, and when he does, he'll do whatever he can to fix it. The most memorable example of this, in my opinion, is Marge Be Not Proud, where Bart disappoints Marge by stealing a violent video game, only for him to make up for it by getting a nice Christmas photo taken at the mall as a gift. He's also been shown to stand up for his family at times, like when he straight up threatened to beat one of Nelson's old goons if he didn't give Lisa her cupcakes back.
So give her back those cupcakes before I knock your block off.
Still, he can also be kind of a jerk, like when he abandoned Milhouse to be beaten senseless by Nelson during a race. If we had to place one above the other, we'd give Lisa just the slightest edge over Bart, but the way we see it, these are just two kinds of troubled, flawed, but ultimately well-meaning kids who deserve a spot in the good section even if it's on the lower end. He may have been gone for years, but Apu will always hold a special place in our hearts. Oh, he's not dead or anything, just kind of stopped existing. It's a shame too, Apu was a chill guy in general. Aside from being notoriously cheap even to the point of selling his customers expired meat, something that could really get someone sick, Apu is an honest guy who's just trying his best to take care of himself and his family. While obviously he has to lose some points for cheating on his wife, he immediately gains most of them back by being honest with her about what he's done and and working himself to the bone to win her back. Not that we're taking away from how terrible adultery is, but at least Apu had the decency to clean up his act, and that's something to be respected. Now we're returning to the staff of Springfield Elementary, starting with Miss Hoover. By far the less fleshed out of the series' two recurring teachers, Miss Hoover gains a slight upper hand against her colleague for the fact that she seems at least a little more concerned for her children. Sure, she's totally exhausted by her job, but who wouldn't be? At the end of the day, she shows up and does her best to give the kids an education, though maybe she could stand to stop smoking so much on the job. The same could be said for Edna Krabappel. Edna had much more screen time than Miss Hoover before the passing of her voice actress Marsha Wallace, rest in peace. She was always much more nonchalant than her colleagues, preferring to drink and smoke in class rather than do much in the way of teaching or connecting with her students.
Bart, it's such a nice day today. Let's have detention outside.
But we still place her in the good category for the episode Bart Gets an F, in which she drops her usual cold demeanor when she sees Bart crying over failing his test. Seeing that he did actually try, she decides to give him extra credit so that he won't be held back a grade, proving that when it matters most, she can be the guiding hand her students need. Up next is the lovable inventor of the steamed hams, Principal Skinner. Similar to Edna, Skinner is usually a total stick in the mud. He enjoys getting the kids into trouble and takes his job pretty seriously. This goes directly in contrast to his personal life, where he's frankly a total wuss who, despite being in his 40s, allows himself to be bullied around by his horrible mother.
Why couldn't you have died instead of the car?
To Skinner's credit, he does genuinely care about Edna and his students, even if the latter still push him around pretty consistently. He wants to make Springfield Elementary a safe place for the kids to learn, and while he's far from perfect, he's at least genuinely trying to do his job well. For our last fully good character, we have Waylon Smithers, taking the bottom spot in the good category. On his own, he's a decent enough man. He's polite, friendly, and sometimes even helps keep Mr. Burns from going too far off the deep end. But it's the fact that he's Mr. Burns' loyal lapdog that makes him such a morally questionable individual. He rarely questions Monty on anything and has been shown to be jealous of anyone else who receives his attention. We'd mentioned that he's madly in love with Mr. Burns, but we feel it's pretty darn obvious, even if it's downright inexplicable. On occasion, however, Smithers has stood up to Mr. Burns, most notably refusing to support his plan to block out the sun in Who Shot Mr. Burns. This shows that he's willing to stand up for what he believes in, even if it's at the risk of antagonizing his boss. That's enough, albeit barely, to keep him out of our next category. This is the gray area. Local pirate captain / restaurateur Horatio McAllister is first up in this category. This scallywag is an illegitimate sea captain who owns a fried seafood restaurant clearly named the Frying Dutchman. He doesn't get much spotlight, but he's generally a nice guy, especially by pirate standards. That said, his habit of driving ships drunk can pose a pretty significant threat and loses him some points for recklessness.
I just heard there was gold in your belly.
But questionable morals aside, I would totally try his restaurant. Anyone else? The word Sideshow brings a particular character to mind, but way before him, we have to talk about Sideshow Mel. Or, I mean, do we? Sideshow Mel's alright, but he's barely involved in the show at all. He's basically just Krusty's lackey, rarely standing up for himself and sometimes lamenting his position. Not a bad guy by any means, but he doesn't have any standout character traits from what we've seen either. He still deserves a reasonable spot for bringing quality entertainment to kids everywhere, or, well, at least entertainment. The local school bus driver Otto Man is up next. Geologists and DRG players will love this guy because he's both a rocker and a stoner. Now, inherently, there's not much wrong with that. There is something wrong, however, with reckless driving when you're a bus driver responsible for the lives of many children. Otto's a nice guy, but if he's gonna be in this line of work, he should probably get his recreational activities more under control. Again, especially while he's driving. While he is a fictional character in universe, Scratchy is gonna get a break when it comes to our list. Plenty of people of all ages grew up watching Tom and Jerry absolutely eviscerate each other, and as we got older, it was obvious that Jerry was usually the one who provoked Tom rather than the other way around. The same goes for Itchy and Scratchy, and while we have nothing profound to say about his morality, Scratchy is a decent enough cat who certainly doesn't deserve the amount of literal body horror Itchy puts him through. Oh, and on that note, we can't forget about Poochie, the radical skater dog who briefly joined Itchy and Scratchy. He may have failed to keep the fans' interest, but Poochie was always there when his home planet needed him. Too bad he died on the way back there, huh? The town drunk, or one of them at least, Barney Grumble is up next. His severe alcoholism is pretty much the reason he's so low on our list, and simultaneously the reason why he's not any lower. Addiction is a seriously tragic illness to grapple with, and while Barney has attempted to get sober before, it sadly didn't last.
My name is Barney, and I'm an alcoholic.
This is a Girl Scout meeting.
Sure, his drunken stumbling is funny sometimes, but when you think about it, it's more sad than anything. He's still a decent friend though, even if his condition makes him far from the most reliable one. If nothing else, he's never out to hurt anybody. Still, the Gluttony Sinner medal couldn't possibly go to anyone else when this guy's in the running. Next up is the patriarch of the Simpsons family, Abe Simpson. While he's not a saint, Grandpa Simpson is decent enough of a guy despite his negativity. Many of Homer's worst characteristics were sadly passed down by Abe, from his alcoholism to his tendency to neglect his children.
You're a good eater today, Maggie.
That said, while Abe was far from a model parent to Homer, he at least did his best as a single parent after Mona left the family, and he genuinely loves his grandkids too. In general, Abe is always there when the family needs him, even if the contrary isn't always true, at least where Homer is concerned. By and large, he just wishes his family would visit him more often, so while Abe is not perfect, he's a decent man who's just looking for companionship. Right after Abe, we have Mona Simpson, aka Homer's biological mother. She left the family when he was just 9 years old, and while that sounds like a surefire ticket to the bad category, we'll give her at least a little leeway considering the fact that Mr. Burns was after her. Mona was protesting his despicable business practices and as a result became the target of a very serious threat of legal prosecution. She left to save herself and possibly in part Homer due to the danger that her staying would have put him in. But while much of her story is sympathetic, we can't fully excuse the fact that she prioritized social activism over being there for her son. Mona had good intentions, but they ended up deeply hurting her son by the end of the day, so we feel like she's just fine where she is on our list. Coincidentally, our next character is also one of the many deceased ones from the series, Bleeding Gums Murphy. Okay, sure, he's nowhere near as impactful as Mona, but his rapport with Lisa during his final weeks was sweet nonetheless. As a fellow musician and Lisa's role model, he encouraged her gift for music and even gave her his saxophone as a parting gift. So why is he this low? Well, Murphy learned jazz from a musician named Blind Willie Witherspoon, who passed his saxophone down to Murphy, which turned out to be an umbrella. For decades, Murphy let this man, who taught him everything he knew about jazz, believe he was a failure as a musician, even when he was playing an umbrella the whole time. There's no deep reason for it either. Murphy straight up admits with a smile that he thought it was funny.
We all thought it was funny.
His sheer lack of remorse for this loses him a lot of points. From a lack of remorse to a smack of divorce. Next we have Milhouse's parents, Kirk and Luann Van Houten. While they get nowhere near as much focus in the series as their son, we have enough screen time of these two to conclude that they're rocky on their best days and downright toxic on their worst.
You want me to show this to the cat and have the cat tell you what it is?
Neither of them are great with Milhouse either, given how Luann basically ignores him while Kirk basically uses him to try and regain her favor. We can only hope the second round of their marriage is at least a little better than the first. Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, doesn't get a lot of time to shine throughout the series. When she does, it's usually in a negative light. In the episode Moaning Lisa, she was revealed to encourage Marge to smile through her depression, not so Marge would feel better, but so the world would see just how good of a mother she herself was.
Take all your bad feelings and push them down.
How ironic that we're placing her here, right? She also shares some of Patty and Selma's resentment of Homer, and while it's nowhere near as harsh from her, it's still certainly there. While Miss Bouvier is not a pleasant person, she's not malicious, and at the end of the day, she does genuinely love her kids. There isn't much positive to say about her, but there's simply not enough negativity to place her any lower. Perhaps the closest thing to a true neutral character in Springfield next is Gil Gunderson. Like Moleman before him, Gil is mainly there just to be a punching bag for whatever life has to throw at him. He's just nowhere near as funny as Moleman is, nor as outwardly friendly. Gil is just a guy trying to make it through life one day at a time, so we feel comfiest putting him right near the middle of our list. Next is another minor character, Professor Frink. We wouldn't exactly call him a mad scientist per se, but he isn't exactly a sane one either. What with the toying with the fabric of time and the tendency to make problems worse and the yay. But at least he's trying to help, which is more than you can say for some Springfieldians. Up next, we have Superintendent Chalmers. Skinner's no-nonsense boss. Chalmers might just be the closest thing to a totally sane person in Springfield. Sure, he's rough around the edges, but at the end of the day, he's just a very stern man who takes his job seriously. While he's not exactly nice, he does care about keeping the school in order and wants the kids to be enthusiastic about learning. He's no role model, but he's a functioning member of society, and as low of a bar as that is, we've got to give credit where the context permits it. A certain slack-jawed yokel, Cletus Spuckler, is next. True to the hillbilly stereotype, Cletus is as dense as he is friendly.
This avocado just gave me a wedding ring.
Thankfully, he's pretty friendly. As messy of a guy as he is, he's not malicious nor mean most of the time, just a little too true to his character design. Oh yeah, he's also married to his sister. Kinda why he's so low on the list, but whatever. You may think a bully would belong in the bad category by default, but Nelson Muntz says a big ha ha to anyone who thought he'd end up there. While he is a bully, which by default loses him some points, Nelson proves pretty quickly that he's not all bad. For every scene of him brutally beating up one of the wimpier kids, there's another where he almost uncharacteristically protects them from a bigger threat. On top of his occasional good deeds, we really do feel bad for Nelson, given his struggle of not having remotely decent parents, nor even really any friends. It's not hard to see why he's so darn mean all the time.
Savor it! Let the flavors dance on your palate!
But when he does make a friend, like Bart or Martin, he's not unwilling to protect them from being harmed by anyone other than him. Oh, I mean, Martin? Who's Martin? They never hang out. Now it's finally time to talk about the main character himself, Homer Simpson, the lover of donuts, the planter of powers, and most importantly, the Simpson. While his character has declined in recent years, it's worth remembering that Homer was actually a fairly decent guy in the earlier seasons of the show. Sure, he's always been lazy, underachieving, and rather selfish, but there's always been the underlying sense of Homer genuinely loving and caring for his family, even though he screws up here and there. This is especially evident in the first few seasons of the show. Among other deeds, Homer stopped Bart from a deadly daredevil challenge, sacrificed the chance to buy an AC unit for his family to give Lisa her saxophone, worked 2 jobs at once to buy her a pony and pay for its maintenance, has revealed that Maggie is his motivation to work at all, and most evidently, in one early episode, he attempts to end his own life so his family can collect insurance money when they're down on their luck. We're not saying Homer was ever a model citizen or even family man, but he genuinely cares about his family more than anything else.
Does a wife know things?
Yes?
Which is why it's a shame that we can't end the entry here. Homer is also an alcoholic, an often neglectful husband and father, occasionally strangles his young son, and has a notoriously short temper. These traits are even all amplified in later seasons, and while he's never quite reached Peter Griffin levels of bad parenting, never even approached it, honestly, he's definitely got some issues that have sadly grown worse over the years. Nonetheless, Homer at least tries to make up for his worst moments and genuinely does love his family, which is enough to give him a lower, neutral spot than rather an outright bad one. Man, we just know Frank Grimes would be rolling over in his grave. We were a bit harsh on old Grimey in our original good to evil ranking of Springfield citizens. In all fairness, Frank did live an honest life where he tried his best to work hard and be successful. In a true satire of American working culture, however, Frank remained down on his luck and unfulfilled, as so many do, whereas Homer, despite being objectively less qualified and more incompetent, had all the things that Frank Grimes wished he had and then some.
Because from now on, we're enemies.
Do I have to do anything?
We don't blame Frank for being jealous, nor even a bit resentful. It's the fact that he started trying to sabotage Homer out of said resentment that lands him lower. He certainly didn't deserve death, but, well, you literally did it to yourself, man. Let this be a lesson, kids. All work and no play might just make you grimy. He may not have a very respectable spot, but he does have the Envy Sinner Medal to enjoy up there in heaven, or, wherever he is. I don't know what the guy believes in.
Change the channel, Marge.
That's our Homer!
Speaking of being made bitter by lack of fulfillment, that's Mo Sislak's bread and butter. Much like our last entry, we were way too hard on poor Mo last time around. Sure, he's not a model citizen. He's threatened to shoot people multiple times, killed the original Alfalfa in Little Rascals for stealing his bit, and has multiple counts of sexual harassment against him. Okay, he's really not a model citizen, and that last trait easily earns him the Lust Sinner Medal, but he's got his good traits. Mo has a soft spot for babies and children. We see this in the episode Mo Baby Blues, where he bonds with Maggie after catching her stops him from taking his own life. He's also a decent friend, and has even been shown to genuinely improve himself when he gets into healthy relationships.
You have not been treating your wives the way they deserve.
All of which inevitably fail, but the effort is certainly there. Mo might be a jerk most of the time, but he's not a fundamentally bad guy. He's just desperate for human connection and doesn't know how to go about it in a way that doesn't involve criminal activity. We still can't fully excuse that though, sorry Mo. Yeehaw! Grab your pistols, cause next up is Richard Texan. If there's something to be celebrated, you can bet this gun-toting goofball will be ready with pistols to fire like it's the start of a track meet. As for why he's so low, I mean, look man, you really gotta be careful where you aim those things. They aren't toys, however much you treat them as such. Still, despite the usual persona of rich businessmen in cartoons, rich isn't necessarily evil. Selfish and reckless? Absolutely, but evil? Not quite, but we're certainly getting there. You guys might remember Troy McClure for starring in such films as Lead Paint, Delicious but Deadly, and Here Comes the Metric System. He's an actor who can do it all, well, except be a devoted family man. He marries Selma in the episode A Fish Called Selma, and does so primarily just for public relations. He's ultimately willing to bring a child into the world just to improve his own image, which is a pretty sleazy move. Even Selma wasn't down for it, and spoilers, she's not all that nice either. But we will give Troy McClure the Pride Sinner Medal for his ego. And for the grand finale of the gray area, this list wouldn't be complete without Grand Skipper Willie. While he's not the most complex character, Willie is as hilarious as he is aggressive. For every time he's shown his violent, aggressive temper, there's another where he's more than willing to protect the school and its students from whatever threats come towards them.
There's a dog running around in the air ducts.
Willie is pure chaos as a character, and while he's not a bad dude, he's one you might like to keep at arm's length. He really is the perfect character to close out our gray area. Now, it's time for the characters who would make you say boo, or at least boo earns. These characters are the bad to evil. Kicking off this category, and probably some nerds, are Nelson's bullying companions, Kearney, Dolph, and Jimbo. What places them so much lower than the most iconic bully of the series is the simple fact that they are much older. Okay, not like 40 or something. They're all teenagers, with the oldest, Kearney, being 19. We likely don't need to tell you that it's very wrong, not to mention creepy, for them to be bullying kids so much younger than themselves. They also lack the good traits Nelson has, which cements their low position. There aren't any lower, though, because they're still young and could definitely change for the better later on, but for now, they've earned their position here.
Who wants their lunch money back?
Leaning more into the more dramatic aspects of the show, next up is Artie Ziff. He was Homer's romance rival in high school, as both of them were pining over Marge. While Marge initially went to prom with Artie, his pushiness turned her off, but rather than working on himself or anything crazy like that, Artie remained obsessed with Marge to the point where he recreated their prom night so he could force a kiss onto her.
If Marge marries Artie, I'll never be born.
To his credit, he does apologize, but his unhealthy fixation on Marge, despite her clear disinterest and, marriage, is a big issue he needs to correct. It's sad to see that he hasn't improved in terms of his obsession nor his pushiness. Just move on, dude. While he's far from the worst character ever, Comic Book Guy has still earned a low spot on our list. He's one of the few in the bottom category to not be a violent criminal, which is good, obviously, but he makes up for that with his genuine meanness to everyone around him.
Out of my way, League of Non-Legends.
The guy is a stereotypical neckbeard, always having something negative to say to try and bring down the mood of everyone around him. There's also the fact that he cons people frequently at his store, even kids. He might not be a criminal, but he's certainly a jerk. Don't let their last name fool you. Reverend Lovejoy and Helen Lovejoy are far from loving, joyful people. Like Comic Book Guy, they're not exactly criminals, just jerks who use their positions to get what they want. They're selfish, condescending, and rude, but not outright evil. That said, we place him lower than Comic Book Guy because he at least wears his jerkiness with pride. These two are supposed to be Christians, but they're the furthest thing from old Nettie. Hey! Everyone's favorite alcoholic children's entertainer, Krusty the Clown, is up next. His goofy personality might make him seem like a delight, but Krusty can be a real jerk at times. He mistreats his employees and doesn't appreciate them nor his fans as much as he ought to. He's also a total sellout with an ego that's way better than it ought to be. That said, if nothing else, Krusty does at least have some of his moral fibers intact. He appreciates Bart and Lisa's work to help him out here and there, and does his best to connect with his estranged daughter, Sophie.
That's my hero.
Always will be.
Krusty is still self-absorbed and miserable, but at least he's got some good in him. All right, boys, let's start booking some of the real criminals, like Chief Wiggum. Well, I can see why he's this low, at least. He's got to be the most incompetent cop in cartoon history. Despite his effort to protect Springfield, he's negligent at best and downright detrimental at worst. Actually, hot take, the Darwin Sinner Medal goes to Chief Wiggum. Sure, Ralph is objectively dumber, but he's a kid who's inhaled too much glue and tar fumes. You're the chief of police, dude, and you don't know that saying over after a radio call doesn't mean the crime itself is over?
Oh, well, thank God that's over. I was worried there for a second.
While Chief Wiggum is a terrible police officer, we're giving him some slack because he at least usually means well. It's not enough to save him from the bad category, but if we had to say something actually good about him, he does love his son Ralph. Any interaction between these two makes it clear that Ralphie is his dad's whole world. Heck, he loves him so much that in the future he made a cloning machine for him so the world would never be without Ralph. While Chief Wiggum is a horrible cop, in the realm of fatherhood, he at least finds some redemption for that infamous incompetence of his. That's more than we can say for reporter Kent Brockman. We still aren't quite in jailable territory yet, but Kent is one of the most unsympathetic characters in the entire series. He doesn't care one bit about making the world a better place, nor even giving the truth for any given situation. He's just there to get a paycheck, however sketchy he has to be to get it. Next up is another Umbrella entry, and given that it's Patty and Selma, I don't think anyone's going to be too mad about us ranking them together. Any points they would get from their love for each other, and in Selma's case refusing to bring a child into her loveless marriage with Troy McClure, are immediately taken away by their treatment of those around them. These two are unbearably mean and miserable, showing callousness to others at best and outright cruelty at worst. Homer is basically their favorite target, whether they're basically enslaving him under the threat of exposing an IOU to Marge or straight up trying to kill him during what was already a suicide attempt. These two go beyond your average disapproving step-siblings and into full-on Homer-side territory. Now, we would love to give Herman some credit for his help with Bart planning a counterattack on his school bully Nelson, even if he did take things a little too seriously, but Herman takes the con artistry of comic book guy and tacks on a bit of extra criminal activity. He's more than willing to hold Homer hostage when the latter discovers his counterfeit genes operation, and basically shows no remorse for his crimes. Now, while he is a pretty scummy guy, there are definitely worse crimes to commit than making cruddy pants. Next, we have a lawyer you'd better not call Lionel Hutz. He is the spitting image of an unethical lawyer. Sure, he's outwardly friendly and seems altruistic, but don't be fooled. Hutz is in this for the money, and only the money. He even encourages his clients to directly lie or exaggerate their cases to get more of a payout.
Wrong! You are not fine! You are in constant pain!
You could argue it's just part of his job, to which I'll argue, fair, but repeatedly running over the judge's son definitely is not. That said, it's still almost better than how Agnes Skinner treats her own son. Agnes is every negative mother stereotype rolled into one. She's a helicopter parent to Seymour, her adult son, constantly berates and abuses him and controls his life to a downright toxic degree.
Your draft number was too high. The suspense was killing me.
Their banter might be hilarious, but we definitely wouldn't blame Seymour if he ended up plopping her into a nursing home. We won't even give her credit for raising him since, by Seymour's insistence, she insists on being repaid for all the food he ate as a child. Probably weren't even any steamed hams. Landing just outside of the top 10 is Springfield's other, cheaper, much less ethical doctor. Hi, everybody! It's Dr. Nick Riviera. Sure, with healthcare prices like those in the USA, you wouldn't be blamed for jumping for joy at the idea of a discount surgery clinic. Desperate times call for desperate measures, after all. That said, from Nick's perspective, he is actively putting his patients' lives in the balance just to drum up business.
How many opioids would you like?
Unlike Dr. Hibert, he's neither intelligent nor disciplined in his practices, and the only reason he's not even lower is because he's the final character on our list who isn't outright maliciously evil. At number 10, we have a character who's been around since the first episode, Les Moore. He was Santa's Little Helper's original owner, and when the little guy lost one too many times, Les threw him out onto the streets, effectively abandoning him. That alone is enough to land him a low spot, but when Santa's Little Helper becomes Duffman's sidekick for a time later in the series, Les jumps at the opportunity to reclaim his dog just for the money and fame. Lawful evil in its purest form. Les Moore isn't necessarily breaking any laws, but he breaks the heart of a cute dog, and at the end of the day, isn't that worse? Next, we have Springfield's notorious serial criminal, Snake Jailbird. He's seen robbing people at gunpoint repeatedly throughout the series, and he never once seems to even try to improve as a person. Well, actually, that's wrong. He was willing to try relationship therapy with Apu to improve their robbing life, after all. And unlike our last entry, he's actually nice to animals, sometimes. When he stole this puppy from Bart and Lisa, his evil scheme was simply to love and cherish it. Man, if only he didn't have so many other crimes, he'd earn a lot more points for that, but sadly, that's the only upper hand he has on the last character. The mayor of Springfield, Mayor Quimby, is up next. He's every negative politician stereotype rolled up into one. From using taxpayers' money to commission murders to having multitudes of sex scandals, Mayor Quimby does it all! And we mean that in the worst way.
Thanks for giving me an 8:30 appointment. You are a lifesaver.
It'd be nice if I could say something good about him to kind of balance that out, but the only good trait this guy has is that the rest of the list is much worse. For example, next we have characters so diabolical they're downright inhuman. Literally, Kang and Kodos appear almost exclusively in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, but you're crazy if you think we'd leave them out this time. They initially seemed nice and hospitable, but that was until Lisa discovered what she thought was their plan to cook and eat the Simpson family.
Initiate fertilization procedure.
Regrettably, this understandable doubt was all the pair needed to hold a grudge against humanity for so long that they'd still be trying to torture and enslave them decades later. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Just outside of the bottom 5 is technically the series' first ever villain, the babysitter bandit from the pilot episode. You might remember her from that one weirdly well-animated clip that circulated the internet a few years ago. True to her name, she's a serial thief who's not above tying up and even potentially harming children.
I hope you're smart enough to keep your mouth shut.
He isn't.
If she weren't the final character with only one major appearance, we feel she'd be even lower. But for right now, the final 5 are just even worse. At number 5, we have the local mob boss, Fat Tony. If Snake is the king of crime in Springfield, Fat Tony is the guy behind the curtain who's really pulling all the strings. He commits his crimes in secret and is therefore a much bigger and harder to defeat threat. His kill count is probably one of the highest in the entire series, and he doesn't exactly have any sympathetic motivations. He does occasionally show a sensitive side, but these moments are rare and never enough to take away from how ruthless he is. This time around, our former gold medalist of evil, Sideshow Bob, misses out on the podium. No, it's not because of any redemptive qualities we found in him, rather, it's because the last three are just that bad. But that's not to say Sideshow Bob isn't still a force to be reckoned with. As if framing his longtime co-star for murder wasn't bad enough, devoting his whole life to murdering a child is a whole new level of messed up.
It's an ICBM. I commit Bart's murder.
Heck, he's even tried to destroy the entirety of Springfield with a bomb. The guy's pretty much pure evil. Even his few moments of humanity, like trying to start anew with his family and even saving Bart on one occasion, are undone by his consistent desire to kill a little boy out of revenge. But as bad as Sideshow Bob is, he's nowhere near as evil as our bronze medalist of evil, the diabolical Mr. Burns. Greedy, sadistic, and just plain soulless, Mr. Burns is truly evil incarnate. Think Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob, but with all of his good traits stripped away, and all of his bad ones made even worse. That's Monty Burns, baby! Any attempts to humanize Burns, although existent, don't do much for him. They tend to be undone by his other actions in the same episode. I can think of no better example than this one scene where Burns tearfully asks Smithers if his power plant was what killed the ducks he's hearing about. When Smithers confirms it for him, it's revealed that Burns was crying out of joy, and that's one of his less egregious sins. Let's not forget that this guy tried to block out the sun just so he could form a monopoly on light itself. He's no doubt earned the Greed Sinner Medal, because if there's money to be made, Burns will go for it, no matter how unethical. Even his attempts to reform, like in the episode The Old Man and the Lisa, end with him slipping back into his old ways. So while he's a great antagonist, Burns is pure evil without a doubt.
You're still evil, and when you're trying to be good, you're even more evil.
The silver medal of evil goes to Scratchy's much worse half, Itchy. As the Jerry to Scratchy's Tom, Itchy is an absolute menace. Like, honestly, do we even need to explain this decision? He absolutely eviscerates Scratchy in so many horrible ways, from blowing him up, to carving him up, to even straight up killing his family. We were tempted to give Sideshow Bob the Wrath Medal, but Itchy deserves it more. The one thing we really need to explain, though, is why he's not number one. And while we definitely have enough to put him there, and the thought crossed our minds, there is the vague possibility that it's all for the cameras. It has been implied that Itchy and Scratchy are pretty good friends and have even worked together here and there. The mouse is still an absolute sadistic psychopath, but, you know, I'm not even sure how I was planning to finish that sentence. What I am sure of, though, is that the gold medal of evil has to go to Russ Cargill, head of the Environmental Protection Agency and main villain of the Simpsons movie. You'd think an organization like EPA would be a good thing, but when a guy as sinister as Russ is at the head of it, no amount of good intentions redeems it. This guy is, like, pure evil. He knows it, he owns it, and he's not even particularly proud of it. He just is. He not only trapped the entirety of Springfield under a giant dome, totally not just because he's connected to the company that made it.
I do own the company that makes the dome, but that's beside the point.
But the moment Springfield tried to escape, he literally tried to blow up the entire city. This guy had no problem blowing up thousands of people for pretty much no reason. It's one thing to do bad things for a shoddy reason. Mr. Burns is corrupt and callous for the sake of money, and Itchy is sadistic for the sake of his show with Scratchy, but despite his organization's name, Russ just abuses his power to domineer others, and the moment he's faced with any inconvenience, resorts to manipulating the freaking president into unknowingly signing off on the idea of silencing his enemies via death. Even after he was foiled, Russ was still mad enough to try and kill Bart and Homer, showing that, when all else fails, murder will still be on this psycho's mind. The Simpsons is the most famous animated sitcom of all time, and today we're taking a look at some classic dirty jokes in Springfield that kids totally missed.
I can't believe you talked me into this.
Willie's name. Alright, come on. When you have a character named Willie, you already have a ton of emergency jokes up your sleeve.
Do not touch Willie. Good advice.
On one occasion, he tells Skinner,
"That's the last time you'll slap your Willie around."
"Dude, put that thing away. There are like children here." Stupid, sexy Flanders. Ned's skiing outfit
feels like I'm wearing nothing at all.
To a kid, it might just be funny because, haha, his butt is showing. To adults, well, Homer might have just discovered a newfound appreciation for his neighbor.
That suit's a little revealing, isn't it?
Side note, does anyone else always forget that Ned Flanders is absolutely ripped? Daddy, I'm gay! Bart tells Rod Flanders that gay means
you used to be afraid, but now you're not.
To which a newly brave Rod proclaims,
"I'm gay, Daddy! I'm gay!"
All thanks to Marge. That is truly the look of a man betrayed. Ned's tragic past. In the episode Hurricane Neddy, Ned Flanders finally snaps and checks himself into a mental hospital. Here, it's revealed that he was once a real hellraiser of a kid. He'd pretended to be
Dick Tracy, bam! Take that, prune face! Now I'm prune face! Take that, Dick Tracy! Now I'm prune Tracy!
Well, you do the math, or the English. Do you come with the car? When Homer enters a raffle for a fancy car, he playfully asks the woman standing next to it if she comes with it.
Do you come with the car?
Only for her to give the exact same playful response to both him and the next guy in line.
Oh, you.
Honestly, that's some serious commitment to the job. We respect it. You'll understand when you're older. When Bart suggests that you can't have fun in bed, Homer chuckles and tells him,
Oh, son, when you're older, you'll know better.
Right before he's seen in bed eating a giant sandwich. Not the only kind of fun you can have there, but definitely the most family-friendly. Bart's time as a mini Hugh Hefner. On that note, we can't forget the time Bart took on the lifestyle of Playboy magazine owner Hugh Hefner. At the time, seeing a kid imitate such a raunchy lifestyle was no doubt vulgar, but given what kids are exposed to even easier today, it actually seems kind of innocent and almost endearing in comparison. Here's a messier kind of fun. Bart finds a VHS tape labeled Marge and Homer Get Dirty and plays it in an attempt to scare Lisa, only to find out that the video consists of Marge and Homer carving pumpkins.
Every tape is pumpkin carving.
As do all of the others they found. Why do they have so many of these tapes? TV can certainly get dirtier. In one episode, the Catholic Church runs a Super Bowl ad featuring women in bikinis seductively cleaning and gassing up cars. Honestly, it's still less bizarre than some commercials actually out there.
These Super Bowl commercials are weird.
Remember Puppy Monkey Baby? Now let's talk about some dirty visual gags. In one episode, a sign that reads Sneed's Feed and Seed, formerly Chuck's, has a suggestive name on its own. Then you consider the words that might rhyme with Chuck, and all of a sudden you don't really want to be fed anything from there. That's not the only subtle sign-related joke, though. In one episode, a sign reading Springfield Heights Institute of Technology is shown. Here's a hint, read only the capital letters. Oh, and we can't forget the Sleep Easy Motel, which has letters lit up that spell out Sleazy Motel. Tragically, all it would have taken to save them from this was a spell check. There's some other cheeky jokes too, like Moe calling his garage
a car hole,
and adult Bart telling Miss Hoover that he knows why they call her that.
He must have been vacuuming for an hour.
Anything to please my man.
With Hoover being a vacuum brand. And this absolutely legendary line from Ned Flanders.
All of us pull a few boners now and then. Go off half-cocked, make asses of ourselves.
Are you sure you don't, Ned? That's a lot of penis jokes for 2 short sentences. Oh, honorable mention to the time Ned begged Homer to punch him as revenge for him punching Homer and wording it as,
"Come on, Homer, I'm insisting on a fisting."
Smithers got a little too excited about that.
What's this about a fisting?
I think I'll stick with Walgreens. The name of his pharmacy with the confusing origin story is a reference to the tragic play Oedipus by Sophocles, which was about a man who found out that his wife was actually his biological mother. It's a whole tragedy about a man banging his own mother. Fictional history repeats itself. On a similar note, let's not gloss over the fact that in one episode, Milhouse just casually called Marge hot to Bart.
Normally, I think your mom is hot.
Really, you let his inner Carl Weezer slip there?
So, what do you guys want to do today? Hang out with your mom?
Guys.
Honestly, though, it's got to take some serious confidence to admit something like that. I've got on him for that much, at least. Speaking of Marge, when she asks Bart how he got a cell phone, Bart replies that it was the same way she got him.
By accident, on a golf course.
So, wait, did Marge and Homer bang on a golf course? Or did she give birth on a golf course? Or was Bart not actually their kid, but a random child they kidnapped from a golf course? And this show is actually hidden psychological horror and get a room. One time, Nelson tells Bart and Lisa to get a room.
Get a room, you two.
To which the latter replies,
we're brother and sister.
Knowing Nelson, he either genuinely forgot they were siblings or just doesn't understand any type of social boundary. We're much more concerned with Milhouse's belief that his parents are brother and sister, though.
So are my parents, I think.
Marge's yoga position. Returning to political commentary for a moment, Marge is in a position on her hands and knees with her butt in the air. I swear this scene isn't what it sounds like. But when she understandably asks what the position is, her instructor says,
"The American taxpayer."
Shots fired, just like the shots those taxes fire up the taxpayer's ass. Homer's burnt tongue. When Homer gets his tongue burnt by eating a flaming stick and drinking lighter fluid, oh God, this man is dumb. Dr. Hibert warns Marge
it may put something of a cramp in your lovemaking.
Clearly referring to oral sex. Marge remains blissfully unaware, assuring the doctor
if he wants me to do something, he'll just write it down.
Now, how about an in-universe dirty joke? Homer reads a Play Dude magazine with a raunchy joke.
Finds IUD as love springs internal. I don't get it.
It's cool, Homer. We didn't either. An IUD is a contraceptive device women put in down their area to prevent the uterus from being impregnated, so any loving that ends up in there is sprung out internally. At least, I'm pretty sure that's what it means. Hourglass figure. In one of the more subtle jokes of the series, Bart snickers as he enters his locker combination.
36, 24, 36.
This also happens to be the chest to hip to waist ratio that many consider to be the ideal body type for women, which is pretty funny actually. Like, what are you gonna do? Measure them on the first date? How far will Bart go? When Ralph buys Lisa tickets to the Krusty anniversary show, Bart is instantly jealous and offers to take the burden off her shoulders, since he wants to go anyway.
I'll go, disguised as you.
When Lisa asks him about the possibility of holding hands or kissing with another guy, Bart says he's willing to make that sacrifice, followed by assuring his much smarter sister,
what if he... You don't want to know how far I'll go.
Now that's a ride or die fan. He's also willing to go far in relationships. When Bart's new girlfriend wants to end things, he tells her he can change.
Give me another chance. I'll be way more attentive to your needs on the seesaw. Well, I'll stay down there for as long as you want.
That's... ew.
Move along. Relationship's over.
We wouldn't dare forget Smithers' affection for Mr. Burns. Remember a couple years back when people were dogging on Mordecai from Regular Show for being a huge simp? We let Smithers off way too easy. This man is Burns' ride or die, emphasis on ride, from fantasizing about Burns flying into his room in the dead of night or popping out of a cake to assuring him that he does see him as a god.
Ladies and gentlemen, behold your new god.
And would gladly get on his knees before him. Smithers is clearly wanting to get something more than a mere raise from his boss. Let's not overlook the guy's screensaver.
Hello, Smithers. You're quite good at turning me on.
Props to Lisa for being nice enough to ignore that. It turns out that Smithers might not be alone. When Homer mistakes Mr. Burns' attempts at union negotiations as a sexual proposition...
Wait a minute, is he coming on to me?
He turns him down, but not without telling him...
Sure, I'm flattered. Maybe even a little curious.
In another episode, Burns tells Homer he needs to be loved.
I need your help. I want to be loved.
To which Homer simply says,
well, I'll need some beer.
If these two moments are any indication, Homer is more than willing to bang Mr. Burns if the need arises. You've got some competition, Mr. Smithers. Now it's time for the innuendo lightning round, because there are a lot of these, including, but not limited to, Homer asking Marge,
well, Marge, should I wax slow or fast?
Becoming Mr. Plow, a suggestive name made even dirtier by the way Marge takes a 10-minute ride on him.
Just, for fun.
And Principal Skinner telling Nibbles the hamster to chew through his ball sack.
Chew through my ball sack.
Obviously meaning the dodgeball sack he was stuck in, but Nibbles' reaction is proof that he definitely doesn't swing that way. Oh yeah, one time Abe mentioned he'd love to live in a condom.
Boy, I'd like to live in one of those.
Which, some of these really don't leave much room for comment. There's definitely room for comment on Fat Tony's revelation that Troy McClure is sleeping with the fishes.
Please, no, I just ate a whole plate of dingamagoo.
Oh, he's not dead or anything, he's literally sleeping with fishes. There are countless more innuendos throughout the series, but we'd be here all day if we listed every one of them. This show mentions everything from glory holes and golden showers.
Because of you, we're all taking golden showers.
To Bill Clinton's sex scandals. And let's not ignore Krusty's questionable behavior. In one episode, he struggles to come up with a joke that's appropriate for his child audience.
12-inch pianist. Oh, no, wait.
Certainly won't cut it. You have to wonder how worried he actually is, though. The man sells birthday cards marketed to children with scantily clad women inside. Hell, he has his own pregnancy test. Not to mention, he apparently was a regular at a place called The Sex Cauldron.
I thought they closed that place down.
Is that like a witch-themed brothel? Do we want to know? I mean, no, not particularly. We do want to know the nature of Snake and Apu's relationship, though. In one episode, the two are in counseling with some issues to work out. Apparently, Apu wishes that Snake would rob him more.
He used to rob me 2-3 times a week. Now, I'm lucky if I get it once a month.
But Snake wishes Apu would initiate every so often instead of just standing there.
I have to do all the work. He just stands there.
I've heard of BDSM, but this is ridiculous.
Apu, sometimes when I rob you, it's like you're not even there.
Snake, it may be time to rob other people. Now, these last two scenes are in a similar vein, but they're not just dirty. These are the downright disturbing jokes. First of all, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this notorious scene. In the episode Homer vs. Dignity, Mr. Burns has Homer cosplay as a panda in a zoo exhibit. The ultimate result is Homer being violated by said panda.
You ain't going nowhere, cutie.
You know what the craziest part is? This isn't the only scene where Homer gets violated. In The Strong Arms of the Maw, Marge gets jacked following a mugging, and in one scene, her strength somehow leads to her assaulting Homer with unwanted advances.
Let's do it.
I have an early date.
I wasn't asking.
It's played off as a joke, albeit one that's aged very poorly in recent years. What the hell?
Ow. Ow. Oh.
But I guess that's just what 30+ seasons does to a show, right? We started the list talking about bowling balls and cartoon animal fights and ended with marital assault. Cue the Gracie Films outro! If you're seeing a bunch of clouds and hearing an angelic choir in the background, don't worry. You're probably not dying, you're just getting ready to watch us rank every major character in The Simpsons from worst to best. This is The Simpsons character tier list.
I just wanted a place to sit down.
Like usual, we'll be starting with the least likable characters in Springfield. These characters will make us say boo earns more than any other. This is the F tier.
Who the hell are these people?
Our pick for the very bottom of the list has to be Helen Lovejoy. The mean-spirited characters in adult cartoons are in no short supply, and The Simpsons is no exception. However, most of them have one very crucial attribute. They're funny. That, my friends, is why Helen Lovejoy is easily the weakest character of the ensemble cast. Despite being the wife of local minister Reverend Lovejoy, she's not exactly Christ-like, being more of a snooty busybody than anything else. We can even give the Reverend some points due to him being somewhat funny at times, but Helen is both rude and boring, which is a dangerous combo worthy of our bottom spot.
Okay, mood's gone.
I don't know if this is going to be a hot take, but next is Sideshow Mel. Look, nobody expected Sideshow Mel to be a worthy replacement for the old rake stepper himself. I get that, but it's only reasonable to expect something, right? Sideshow Mel isn't in F tier because he's a bad character. No, he's here because, I mean, the guy's just there.
They say any publicity is good publicity.
He doesn't really add all that much to any particular episode, and when he does play a role, he's always overshadowed by the other characters. Frankly, an outright irritating character is often better than a boring one like this.
Yes.
Which brings me to a character I place in F tier only by sheer obligation, Agnes Skinner. Agnes is Principal Skinner's overly controlling mother. She's incredibly demeaning and insulting towards her son, never really coming around on him one way or another.
Lost your spine, huh? You just keep finding new ways to disappoint me.
That said, for as unpleasant as she is, she's pretty darn funny, and seeing Skinner slowly lose his temper around her is pretty entertaining. I still hate her, but since that's pretty much the whole purpose of her character, I guess I can't place her any lower for it. And closing out the bottom tier, we have a dual entry for Milhouse's parents, Kirk and Luann Van Houten. Really, these two's utter lack of parenting skills would have already earned them a low spot. They have their moments, sure, but they're not nearly funny enough to even out how unpleasant and pathetic they are, often either neglecting their son or using him to get back at the other. But if that weren't enough, in season 26, Milhouse casually dropped the reveal,
"Marrying a cousin worked out great for my parents."
Like, dude, we have a whole character for that joke already, man, come on! Now, let's move on to the D tier, for the characters who suck a little bit less. Kicking this category off is Reverend Lovejoy. Now, Lovejoy is far from a likable character, but he has two things above his wife. One, he's at least kind of funny. By no means is he anywhere near one of the funniest characters in the show, but he's at least not boring. And as for number two, he's a pretty decent satire for religious hypocrisy. Sadly, there are all too many Christian leaders who take advantage of their congregation and their wallets without any real concern for them, so it's nice to have a character who exists to call out that issue. On a similar note, up next is Kent Brockman, Springfield's own news anchor. Like all too many journalists out there, Kent here doesn't really care about most of the issues he reports on. He's just there to do his job, get paid, and move on. I guess there's nothing too terribly wrong with that though, and he's really not as exploitative as Lovejoy, so we're gonna give him a slightly higher position. Still, we don't particularly have much positive to say about him either, save for the occasional funny one-liner.
Tragic news tonight, 120 dead in a tidal wave in Kuala France.
Now we have two characters we couldn't dream of placing separately, Patty and Selma. Because I can't tell them apart, and while I'm sure there are exceptions, you probably can't either, right?
Hello, Marge. Hello, Marge.
Either way, I'm not even extending them that courtesy of bothering. These two are the worst, man. Like Agnes, we'll give them some credit for the fact that they're at least meant to be hated. They're abrasive, constantly berating and abusing Homer, and
when you come out of there, the first thing you're gonna see is a man with a good job.
Yeah, the doctor.
Doing pretty much everything short of killing the guy. But if nothing else, they aren't entirely one note. There was that one episode where Selma briefly married Troy McClure only to leave him when he planned to have a child for the sole sake of publicity. This shows that deep down, Selma at least has some semblance of a heart, and the twins do seem to care about each other, even if they're pretty much the only ones who do. Oh, Superintendent Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're ready for the next spot. Really, there isn't too much to say about Chalmers. Like Agnes, he tends to berate Skinner and antagonize him whenever he shows up. Unlike dear old Mother, though, it's kind of Chalmers' job to berate Skinner, and he usually has much more valid reasons when he does, to be fair. The dearly departed Maude Flanders takes our next spot. She's a pretty divisive one, to be frank. On one hand, she's a very pleasant woman. Unlike Helen, Maude was a sincerely loving Christian woman and a devoted mother and wife to her family. On the other hand, well, come on. How much can I really say about a character whose most memorable moment in the series was literally dying? I guess it's kind of funny that she came back as a ghost wanting revenge on Homer, who didn't even mean to do her any harm, but that's about as much as I can say for her in terms of comedy. Rounding out the day tier, we have Springfield's own local redneck, Cletus. He's one of the many recurring gag characters in the show, but honestly, he's one of the weakest. It can be funny to see just how absurdly trailer trash this dude gets whenever he's on screen, and he has some pretty funny moments.
Hey, what's going on this side?
But he just doesn't make us laugh nearly enough for us to place him any higher. But at least the incest jokes are a little less shocking coming from him.
Wait a minute. Are you two brother and sister?
We's all kind of things.
Now let's move on to the next category, for the more middle-of-the-road characters. These are the C-tier characters. Kicking off this category is local Godfather knockoff Fat Tony.
You know, the movie, The Godfather.
Never heard of it.
A very what you see is what you get character. Fat Tony is, well, seriously, just look at him.
Fat Tony.
What? What did I do?
He's a sketchy mafia boss who shows up as a gag character and occasionally a full-blown antagonist. One of those characters you can take one glance at and know exactly what he's all about. He has his interesting episodes and moments, but they aren't enough to place him any higher. In basically the exact same vein, next is Snake Jailbird. In a town with a police force as special as Springfield's, it wouldn't be hard to have a thriving career as a violent criminal, so it's no wonder Snake is always making a scene whenever he shows up. But hey, at least he's an animal lover.
Hey, mister, would you like a puppy?
No, but I'll take one.
It's not a heart of gold, but he does have a heart at all, somewhere in there. Speaking of characters who probably should be in jail, next is Otto. Man, look, I have nothing against enjoying a little of that reeferino, but maybe don't do it while driving a bus full of children? Just a thought. Still, aside from his likely high DUI count, Otto seems like a chill guy. He's content to just vibe and imbibe wherever he goes. Just do not let him drive, even though that's his job. But if you do, you'd better call Lionel Hutz. One of the departed Phil Hartman's dearly missed classic characters, Lionel Hutz was a sleazy lawyer who'd help his clients out with any case they needed. That is, assuming it's profitable, of course, and not particularly dangerous to himself. He's a sketchy guy, sure, but he's a fairly smart businessman and pretty darn funny on top of that.
Do I still get paid?
Hey you, are you struggling with various internal organ problems that may or may not require surgery? Then you're in luck. This video is sponsored by Dr. Nick Riviera. If you need open heart surgery at a reasonable price and a skill level that reflects said reasonable price, Nick is your man. If you aren't satisfied, just let him know. He won't do anything about it, but he seems like a good listener. And make sure to use our special link in the description for 25% off your order of 10 surgeries or more. It's not really there, don't look for it. Woo! Let's give it up for Richard Texan in our next spot. Rich here is a simple man. He's got a fancy suit, a fancier gun, and, dare I say it, an even fancier outlook on life. No celebration is too small to waste a bullet or two on. Oh, wait, no, not on people. No, he just shoots them in the air. Jeez, man, he's not that crazy. Actually, no, he totally would do that. Well, crazy or not, I feel like he'd get along well with Horatio McAllister. I have a soft spot for these goofy, specifically themed side characters. Like, the whole joke with McAllister is that he's a pirate who doesn't know how to sail. He does know how to fry, though, which helps him run the Frying Dutchman, and I'll stand by the fact that I really want to try that place one day. Aside from his incompetence regarding sailing,
too glass-sized.
He seems like a pretty cool guy, and I can't help but find him weirdly endearing. Closing out the C tier are Ned's creepy little offspring, Rod and Todd. Weirdly, the hostile roasts aside, Rod and Todd are sweet kids. They're obedient to their parents, nice to their fellow kids, and seem to take on any situation with an optimistic mindset. Compared to the troublemaking Bart and often hypocritical Lisa, it's funny to see just how well-behaved the neighbors right next to them are. Despite their optimism, though, it's clear to see that they're always ready for trouble. Let's not forget that when Ned asked Todd to shoot him if he tried to come back into his own bomb shelter, Todd had a shotgun pulled out in seconds. But sadly, it didn't give him a shot at our next section.
That's it, young man. No Bible stories for you tonight.
This is the B tier, and we're starting to get to the more iconic Springfieldians now. Kicking off this category, we have Troy McClure. You may remember him from any number of weirdly titled documentaries and other genre of film masterpieces he's starred in, but we remember him for being, like Lionel Hutz, another dearly missed character from the classic era. Rest in peace, Phil Hartman. Here's hoping you're teaching kids about the horrors of the meat industry in heaven. Resident genius and possibly undercover narc Martin is up next. Admittedly, he's not Springfield Elementary's most iconic nerdy character, but he's still a pretty good one. Despite being constantly bullied, Martin remains one of the nicest characters in the series, making for a decent friend whenever he's needed. Whether it's hyping up Nelson after he saves him from a bully, or helping Bart study for a test, it's one thing to be kind, but to be kind to people who treat you like trash takes another level of humility, so we're going to give him some bonus points for that. Next up is one of the most heroic characters, Snowball II. Sure, she's not nearly as iconic as the other Simpson family pet, but let's not forget that she was the one who saved Homer from a fire he was otherwise stuck in.
I always thought cats were just for losers who live in apartments.
That's a feat feat that only she and Ned Flanders have under their belts, or a collar in this case. But we're still going to bring Santa's little helper to a slightly higher spot. Debuting in the first official episode of the series, he's a dog who was rejected by his sleazy owner for losing a race. Bart and the rest of the family took a liking to him instantly, so this little guy became a permanent member of the Simpson family. While he's far from the most iconic character overall, it's nice to see that he's still around after all these years. Some things never change, and maybe they shouldn't. Now let's move from a best friend to a worst enemy, that enemy being Russ Cargill from the Simpsons movie. Honestly, we just want to shout this guy out for being a great cinematic villain for the movie. Mr. Burns could have easily filled this corrupt businessman role on the big screen, so making a new character to spice things up was definitely a neat choice. He also has one of the funniest villain deaths in animation history. Seriously, imagine coming so close to nuking an entire city and getting killed by a baby. Even Burns survived that. Hey, kids, and probably some adults too, it's Krusty the Clown! How could we forget about Springfield's favorite children's entertainer? Some would argue that Krusty gets overused in the series, and that's fair to an extent. But if you ask me, he's more than made up for with his usual sense of humor.
Krusty here to cheer you up as part of the hospital's Last Laugh program.
Even if the joke is usually on him, Krusty is a character who rarely has a dull moment on screen, not to mention some pretty good commentary about kids' media in general. Like, seriously, the Krusty home pregnancy test? Talk about a sellout, man. On the topic of relatively one-note characters, next we have Barney Gumble. He's a weird character in that he feels like one of the most crucial and most inconsequential characters in the show. While he's been called Homer's best friend, Barney doesn't really get as much focus as characters like Ned or Moe, for instance. He's usually just there to make jokes about his alcoholism most of the time.
You'd never get me into a ring. Boxing causes brain damage.
And those can admittedly be pretty darn funny, like his short film Pocahontas, but don't cry for him because, well, we're not placing him any higher for it. He's a good friend though, which earns him a higher spot than we'd otherwise have given him. While they're even less prominent, Kang and Kodos totally deserve a mention on our list. These two aliens appear often in the Treehouse of Horror specials, which, I'll be real, is basically the whole reason they're here in the first place. I just love the idea of these aliens not actively being evil, but rather just pissed off over Lisa accusing them of eating people. Honestly, I'd be kind of peeved too. Way to go, Lisa. We had a chance to befriend aliens and you just had to point out that they might be cannibals? Coming up next, we have one of the most memorable voice performances in the series, Professor Frink. No, really, I don't have any other reason for putting him here. Frink doesn't really do all that much, despite being the resident mad scientist character. He's just a funny-looking dude with a funny-sounding voice. And you know what? Sometimes that's all you need. But I guess sometimes it takes a fairly high IQ to understand comedy, you know? And I can think of no character to demonstrate that better than Bumblebee Man.
Buenas noches, señoritas.
This guy is just, he's a gem. He literally just shows up for some inexplicable TV gags here and there, and that's all well and good already. It's nice to see some good old-fashioned slapstick sometimes. But then there's the episode 22 Short Films in Springfield, where it's revealed that he's actually working his butt off to support his wife and his pet chihuahua, only for her to leave him over the very clumsiness that earned him his job. She doesn't deserve you, Bumblebee Man. None of us do. Welcome to the end of the B tier, and come again, just like we wish Apu Nahasapeemapetilon would. Man, I don't know about you guys, but I have literally never heard someone say that Apu is an offensive character.
Ooh, they used nylon rope this time.
Is it because he's voiced by a white guy? If that's all, you guys would not like my main man Khan. It's really a shame that he's been gone for so long, because Apu was a pretty chill guy. I mean, yeah, he'd serve knowingly tainted food to his customers, and he also cheated on his wife that one time, actually, Apu was a pretty sketchy guy, but hey, at least he was pretty dang funny, right? Without further ado, let's move into some of Springfield's most iconic characters. This is the A tier. Like his former boss, many agree that Sideshow Bob gets overused pretty often, but we don't really mind.
By the way, I'm aware of the irony of appearing on TV in order to decry it, so don't bother pointing that out.
This guy's pretentious, arrogant attitude mixed with his extreme clumsiness makes him one of the funniest antagonists of the series, as does the fact that this is a grown man who has literally devoted his whole life to killing a 10-year-old boy.
Very well, Bart. I shall send you to heaven before I send you to hell.
He leads in some of the most memorable episodes of the series, which we've got to give him some points for. Breaking news, old man yells at cloud, and Abe Simpson is next on our list. Abe is nowhere near a model parent, nor even citizen, but he more than makes up for his shortcomings by being both funny.
Everybody wants something for nothing. I'm old! Gimme!
And having a surprisingly big heart. Abe's vulnerability often brings out the best and worst in the people around him, whether it's Homer nearly leaving him on the side of the road after an argument, or him and Bart teaming up to take down a local school bully. It's nice to see the main character's parent portrayed as a genuine person, rather than either a full-blown villain or just an explanation of why the main character is the way they are. Abe really does feel more like his own character, while still adding to the other Simpson family members. If you feel bad about your current life stage, just know that you're probably not doing as badly as Comic Book Guy.
Oh, loneliness and cheeseburgers are a dangerous mix.
Good old CBG was a warning to the world that not every adult who likes the same stuff kids do is a nice guy. I mean, well, okay, wording it like that, he could be way worse, but Comic Book Guy is still a hilariously mean character who scams children and seems to hate everyone and everything that won't contribute to his collection of comic books and Funko Pops. He gives a bad name to nerd culture enthusiasts everywhere, but since it leads to so many good jokes and gags,
don't try to change me, baby.
We'll let him off easy. But when it comes to Springfieldian nerds, we can't forget about Milhouse. Every kid who struggled with social skills can sympathize with Milhouse. He's such a brutally honest depiction of the struggles that wimpy kids go through. He's got a tumultuous home life, struggles to make friends, and clings to anyone and anything he gets a hold of.
Why didn't you come to visit me, Bart?
It makes him equal parts funny and sympathetic, and really makes you admire how good of a friend he is to Bart, even if that isn't always consistent. These next characters are quite complex. Itchy and Scratchy do many things. They fight, sometimes they fight, but most importantly, they offer kids valuable lessons on conflict resolution, the horrors of war, and terror. Wait, no, they just fight. But to be fair, they're really good at it, and they really raise the question of how Tom and Jerry were allowed to go as far as they did mutilating each other. Like a random tangent, but you guys remember that one episode where they both literally killed themselves after a breakup?
Oh my god! Who made this monstrosity?
Itchy and Scratchy were kind of tame compared to that. Next is one of, if not the most divisive character in the series, Lisa Simpson. Lisa is very much a love or hate character, as some fans love her for her genuine conviction on various social causes, while others hate her for being whiny and often hypocritical. Personally though, I'm in the love category, or at least like. I mean, don't hear what I'm not saying. Lisa can definitely be pretty annoying, but she's genuinely well-meaning and is a kid who just wants to be accepted by her peers. Anyone who grew up as a gifted child knows that the struggles Lisa goes through to find herself are actually more relatable than they're given credit for. So even if she's sometimes definitely a bit grating, we're gonna give this gold-hearted horse lover a pretty honorable spot on our list. It might surprise you guys to see Lenny and Carl so high up on our list. Sure, such a heartfelt, enduring friendship is really sweet, but these guys don't really do all that much. But, well, I'll be honest, it's mainly because of Lenny that they're up so high. Lenny is everyone's favorite Simpsons character after all.
Did you hear something?
No.
Did I?
I don't know.
Carl is cool too, but he'd be at best B tier on his own. Thankfully, Lenny is modest enough to stick back with his old friend. I think I speak for everyone when I say that when I grow up, I want to be just like Lenny.
Work harder. Bye.
Speaking of growing up, next we've got little Maggie Simpson. I don't even think we need to explain why she's up so high. Like, she's a cute little baby with a gun. I mean, yeah, there's always that sweet moment where it's revealed that her baby pictures give Homer the motivation he needs to keep working, but what is that next to the fact that Maggie nearly murdered the two most evil people in the series and succeeded in one of them? She's a true hero, even if she doesn't know it yet, and she just manages to be that little ray of sunshine in basically every scene she's in. Oh, that's why she's shaped like that. Up next is Mr. Burns, his right-hand man, Waylon Smithers.
Smithers is on the town.
An absolute gay icon, whether you're just happy to see some positive representation or you're busy laughing at the fact that this dude literally wants Mr. Burns to fly into his room and make love to him. Smithers is one of the most uncomfortably hilarious characters in the series.
I love boobies!
Seriously, his little screensaver is one of the most disturbing yet hilarious things in the whole show.
Turning me on.
You probably should ignore that.
Still, we have to take off some points for him inexplicably using blackface in the first few episodes he appeared in. Like, seriously, what was that about, Smithers? It might surprise you to see her so high up, but we're giving Edna Krabappel a very respectable spot on our list. Against all odds, she's actually one of the more fleshed out supporting characters in the series. She could easily be written off at face value as grumpy teacher who hates Bart, but at the end of the day, despite all of her nihilism, she does genuinely care about her students.
Okay, Edna, remember, if you can teach one kid one thing, then today will be a success.
The episode Bart Gets an F is the best example of this. Despite being unfazed by Bart failing his history test, when he breaks down crying and reveals that he was actually trying for once, Krabappel takes pity on him, giving him extra credit for showing some good knowledge of history. That scene alone made my respect for both her and Bart go way up, honestly. It's one of those scenes that reminds you that as exaggerated as they are, these guys are still people. I bet you didn't expect to see Nelson so high up on the list. But like Bart's teacher, Nelson is a shockingly deep and multifaceted character. Despite being a bully, he's shown sympathy to people around him quite often, like helping Martin out with bullies or even befriending Bart. What's more, his bullying tendencies stem from an absolutely horrendous home life with parents so awful, I don't even think they're worth giving a spot on this tier list. Nelson isn't one of the most brilliant characters in fiction or anything, but he's funny and surprisingly sympathetic, which earns him a lot of points on our list. Next up, we have Principal Skinner. Really getting a lot of characters from Springfield Elementary out of the way, huh? Despite usually being antagonistic, Skinner is genuinely a good man.
Skinner?
You called?
Made reference.
My mistake.
I mean, sure, he's a doormat for his awful mother, but he's also trying his best to run his school well and make his boss proud. That said, he can also be quite petty at times, which at least leads to most of his more unlucky moments being pretty dang funny. If you're ever sick of him targeting Bart, you just have to wait until Superintendent Chalmers shows up. That's when you know stuff's about to get good. Pull up a bar stool for our next entry, Mo Sislak. The local bartender and owner of Mo's Tavern, Mo is initially portrayed as little more than just that, a sketchy bartender. When he's not on the receiving end of Bart's prank phone calls, he's getting called out for some type of crime. Which one will it be this time? That's a surprise, silly! But all else aside, Mo actually does have a heart. He's a decent friend to Homer, and he's been shown to just want someone to connect with over the years. Even when Mo is a complete insensitive jackass, he's still pretty hilarious. Like when he told Ned that his wife was hot at her funeral.
Hey, I'm paying for a silk-lined coffin, and damn it, I'm gonna feel it.
Landing just below the top 10 is the legendary groundskeeper Willie. The Scot with a red beard, the buff bald, and a temper shorter than a garden gnome. Willie's one of those characters who doesn't need any fancy character arcs to show his stuff. The joke is that he's Scottish and angry. That could easily be the punchline for a sarcastic remark about him, but no, it just works. Willie's a fun character, and while you pretty much know what you're getting whenever he's on screen, it's somehow almost never tiresome. But in his own words, those damn Scots ruined Scotland, so we can't exactly place him any higher.
Just made an enemy for life.
He can enjoy a spot just barely outside of the S tier, though, which I'd say is pretty generous, right? At number 10, we have a one-time character, Frank Grimes, or Grimy for short. I know he hated that nickname, but he's dead, so like, what's he gonna do? Really though, being a major player in Homer's Enemy is enough to give old Grimy a pretty high spot on our list. He acts as a perfect foil to Homer. On one hand, he's both more hardworking and less successful than Homer on all accounts. On the other hand, however, he's nowhere near as kind nor sincere. In contrast to his friendly, albeit lazy colleague, Grimy is condescending and rude to anyone he considers beneath him, which naturally includes our dear homie. He's one of those characters who really makes you think. Okay, yes, I just watched that Amp Lemon video about him. Sue me. Next, we just have to mention Dr. Hibert. Placing this guy in our top tier is probably controversial. He's far from the funniest character in the show, after all. But Hibert more than makes up for that by being one of the most genuinely wholesome characters in the show. On top of that infectious laugh he's got, he's never short on lollipops to offer his loyal patients. Truly, the sign of a legendary physician. In a show that can be as cynical as The Simpsons, it's important to have moments that let you relax and breathe, which Dr. Hibert always works to provide. Our next character's brain may be small, but his heart is big, and Ralph Wiggum has earned a big spot on our list to reflect that. I will admit he was at his best back when he had a few brain cells rather than straight up none. Plenty of jokes were made at his expense, but he at least had some semblance of cognitive competence. But Ralph is still an endearing and fun character. It takes a special kind of stupidity to outshine even Homer in terms of low intellect, but Ralph makes it look downright effortless, and no matter what level of stupidity he's reached,
I'm a unitard!
You can bet he'll have a smile on that face. It's hard to not love such a sweet, endearing kid, even if he's hogging all the pace for himself. Still, as much as we like Ralph, we have to admit that the one who made him is gonna get a bit more credit.
This kid's finally paying off.
Enter one of the funniest side characters in the show, Chief Clancy Wiggum. Take Ralph's complete lack of cognitive capabilities and throw it onto a character who is the literal chief of police, and you have Chief Wiggum. Whether he's actively making every situation around him worse, or just straight up being a criminal himself, Wiggum is always a sight to behold.
No, you got the wrong number. This is 912.
Whether he'll make you laugh or shout in frustration may vary from episode to episode, but you can bet that he'll never be boring.
If anything goes wrong, just dial 911. Unless it's an emergency.
On top of all that though, Wiggum is actually a loving family man and has a pretty sweet relationship with his son Ralph. It doesn't erase all the more horrific qualities, no, but it does add an extra layer of nuance. Landing just outside of the top 5 is the Simpson family's mother and wife, Marge Simpson. That iconic blue hair, that loving, nurturing personality, and that ever-present, raspy voice of reason have been iconic since the 90s. Marge, like Dr. Hibert, stands out not due to being particularly funny compared to other characters, even though she has her moments.
At times like this, I guess all you can do is laugh.
Rather, Marge sticks out by means of being wholesome and sweet. As much as she messes up, there's never any doubt that she loves her family just the way they are. That's something relatively rare to see in adult cartoons, especially quite so consistently, so we've got to give some due credit here. That said, you guys should really consider letting your voice actress rest. The mischievous meme icon himself, Bart Simpson, has cracked our top 5. I know Bart's a little troublemaker, a schemer even, but we just can't help but love the guy.
Well, I'm my own toughest critic, but I think it's genius.
Like Nelson and Milhouse before him, Bart is a realistic, albeit exaggerated, portrayal of troubled kids.
Have you ever been in a police car?
Not in the front.
His best episodes come around whenever he's given a chance to show off his more good-natured, sympathetic side. One of our favorite examples of this is the Christmas episode Marge Be Not Proud, where Bart disappoints Marge by bailing on a Christmas card photo and stealing a new video game. Later, he makes up for it by surprising her with a new portrait from the mall. Bart's mischievous nature combined with his ultimately good heart makes him one of the best characters from a storytelling standpoint, rightfully placing him in our top 5. The last and greatest of the show's gag characters we're bringing into the fray today is none other than Hans Moleman.
This isn't my army reunion.
I swear, every joke involving this guy is an absolute comedy goldmine. Whether it's the reveal that he's actually just 38 years old, the time he got unknowingly seduced by a gay guy, or the deleted scene where he literally robs God at gunpoint.
Now hand over the rest of it. Nice and easy.
Moleman is one of the most hilarious characters in the series' history, and for that, we honor him with the highest spot we could give him.
I just wanted a place to sit down.
Sadly, though, as gay as we are for Moleman, there are 3 characters who make us even gayer. Yeah, that sounds right. The bronze medal of greatness goes to Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns is one of the most iconic cartoon villains out there. Often, villains have to choose between being cartoonishly evil or realistically evil. Monty Burns stands out by managing to do both. He's the kind of guy who does realistic stuff like frivolous lawsuits, underpaying employees, and even harassing one of said employees' wives, but he'll also do such radically screwed up things as trying to block out the sun itself.
I call this enemy the sun.
Burns is the perfect example of a character who can be both a genuine threat and one of the funniest characters in the series, often at the same time.
Smithers, wink my eye.
Sometimes you'll laugh because he said something funny, and other times it'll be out of sheer discomfort from how anyone could even come close to being as diabolical as this guy is. From one end of the morality spectrum to the other, the silver medal of greatness goes to Ned Flanders. This good Samaritan of a neighbor needs no introduction. Ned Flanders is practically everything Homer Simpson isn't.
You make me sick!
He's a hard-working, ambitious man who always places his wife and children's needs above his own, makes sure to raise them in an environment that's both physically and spiritually sound, and, most importantly, looks stupidly sexy in a ski suit. Flanderization aside, Ned has always been a consistently nice, if puritanical character, and despite some lows here and there, he's the most consistently compassionate and lovable character in the show. He's the first one who will show up to help you during a tough time, the first one to apologize when he hurts you, and the last one to leave when you've got nobody left. We'd say Ned is the heart of the series, but believe it or not, that honor goes to our top pick.
No, you can't. If I'm not as good as you, then I'm horrible.
Even if Ned's heart is admittedly a little bigger. But in a show as long-running as The Simpsons, who else could take the top spot but the Simpson himself, Homer Simpson? In both the best and worst senses of the phrase, Homer is an American icon. He's lazy, gluttonous, short-tempered. Okay, basically he's all the 7 deadly sins wrapped into one lovable package. Yet somehow, despite all of that, Homer manages to be a sincere, mostly likable guy, and that's for one simple reason. He's human. For every episode where Homer is a selfish jerk-ass, there's another where he goes above and beyond for his family, especially in the earlier seasons. It's kind of rare for us to give the main character our top spot on these tier lists, but Homer is an exception because he embodies both of the most important facets of the show, humor and heart. Yeah, Homer is hilariously reckless, incompetent, childish, and self-centered, but you never really lose the sense that he genuinely loves his family and is just trying his best. Whether he's doing good or bad, Homer is unapologetically himself, and it's hard to not appreciate that kind of sincerity. Enjoy that donut, homie. You've earned it. One of the oldest characters in Simpsons history, both in the show and outside of the show, is Springfield's Kenny, Hans Moleman. Moleman has been around since the Tracy Ullman shorts, but it isn't until season 4 where his most common joke came about. In most of Moleman's appearances, he's either gravely injured or just dies. So that made us ask one very important question. Which of these deaths have been the most gruesome? I'm Keefinosi with Wicked Binge, and this is Hans Moleman Deaths. Gruesome to A couple of rules are needed for this list if we're going to go forward. Firstly, no off-screen deaths. It either needs to be shown on screen or heavily implied, where Hans is put in a situation that he can't escape from. Secondly, Moleman has to be human for these deaths, so both Demon Moleman and Dinosaur Moleman from Treehouse of Horror don't count. Finally, kills that happen in Treehouse of Horror and couch gags are up for the running. With our rules out of the way, we move into our first category of the list, organ failure. The first and least gruesome death in the series for Moleman is in the episode Ha Ha Land. This season 29 episode, featuring Ed Sheeran, starts with a song about how bad Springfield is in the middle of a traffic jam. In this traffic jam is none other than Hans Moleman on his way to his dialysis treatment. Well, with everyone singing and dancing, he ends up late to this treatment. So, having missed his dialysis treatment, he seems to have kidney failure of some kind, leaving him to die in the middle of a traffic jam. However, a slightly more gruesome death of this style is in $1 Million AB. With Springfield getting a new football team and the commissioner of the Pro Football League coming to town, Springfield has been repainted and recolored. But prior to that, we learn that Springfield leads the nation in heart attacks, probably Homer's fault, and we see Moleman have a fatal heart attack. falling to the ground. We consider heart attacks as more gruesome than kidney failure due to the fact that heart disease can cause kidney failure at times. The most gruesome death in this category is in the episode A Test Before Trying. Moleman is in the hospital for unknown reasons, and Dr. Hibert says he needs to save electricity. So naturally, they decide to unplug Moleman and cut off his life support. He asks if he has a say in this, but his son just tells them that it's air escaping and his heart stops when the life support's unplugged. We consider this more gruesome because his family is the one causing his heart to stop, rather than it being a sudden onset heart attack. After his organs have failed him, the next most gruesome way he can die is in the next category, the Fallers. The least gruesome death in this category is in CE. While Homer and Lisa try to take over the power plant from Mr. Burns, Moleman is killed once more. Inside an office and annoying the people around him, he's thrown out of a window. Now, while the window seems to be ground level, his scream shows that he fell for a while, and likely to his death. We don't see him hit the ground, but it is safe to assume he dies from this. Or the broken glass in him could do the trick. The next death in this category is in Dadicus Finch. At Shauna Chalmers' bat mitzvah, Bart switches everyone's keys so no one can leave. However, Kent Brockman laughs because he has an app that will bring his car to him, and the car does come backing up and hitting Moleman. This causes Moleman to be sent flying off into the distance. Now, he is alive when he's hit by the car, so he definitely does die from the fall. A similar style of death is in the intro to Treehouse of Horror 31. After a political joke about the 2020 election, the world is literally on fire and giant robots modeled after Ed 209 from RoboCop are roaming around. Moleman walks up to one and the robot kicks him, sending him flying and yelling about regretting his vote.
That's what I get for voting for Kanye.
Like the previous, he dies from the fall and not from the initial hit. We consider this more gruesome than the previous because he is kicked by a giant robot instead of being hit by a car. The most gruesome death in this category is in the episode The Dope Show Network. Homer's driving around in his car while on the phone, and meanwhile Moleman is crossing the street while on the phone. With both of them distracted, Homer strikes Moleman and sends him flying through the air. We actually do see him slam against the ground, his glasses get broken, and he's left in a bizarre pose. This is why this one's considered the most gruesome of the Fallers, because we actually see him crash against the ground. A recognizable category for Simpsons fans is when Moleman dies from suffocation, choking, or other forms of asphyxiation. Next is choked up. The least gruesome death in this category is in the episode Children of a Lesser Clod. When Homer injures himself playing basketball, he's got to take care of Rod and Todd while Ned is out. Ned originally wants Marge to do so, but she's at a morgue identifying a body. And the body is Hans Moleman, who is very much alive. The mortician, however, doesn't care and leaves him locked up to suffocate to death.
That's just gas escaping.
We consider this the least gruesome because we don't see what happens, but it's a safe assumption. Now, a very similar death is in the episode Mother Simpson. With Homer supposedly dead, his supposedly dead mother, Mona Simpson, comes to visit his grave. Homer is currently alive and lying in his grave after falling in. Meanwhile, the gravedigger says he never buries anyone alive, causing Moleman to peek out and complain, only to be subsequently buried alive. We count this as more gruesome because it's easier to confirm that he does indeed die here from being buried alive. The next death in this section happens in The Departed. Marge has grown tired from looking after the kids, and while doing this, she accidentally hits Moleman's car. This causes them to hit something and his airbag to deploy, and with how close he was sitting to the wheel, the airbag covers most of his body. It pushes him up against the seat of the car and slowly suffocates him to death. The section Connie Appleseed from the episode Simpsons Tall Tales is next on our list. With the settlers killing large groups of buffalo, Connie tells them that it will cause problems in the future and tries to get them to eat apples. The group leaves her behind alongside Hans Moleman, who is stuck in quicksand, and since no one saves him, he slowly but surely suffocates in the quicksand. We consider this more gruesome because everyone leaves him behind, even though he's asking for help, and a slow death surely follows. However, the most gruesome death in this section belongs to the Joy of Sect. When a cult comes to town and scams almost everyone out of their money, Reverend Lovejoy and Marge try to take it down. While Marge tries to escape, she's chased by a rover balloon that catches Moleman. This balloon shrinks in and suffocates him slowly, pushing his face against it in a creepy way. That moment where we see his face pressed through the plastic is what really makes this the most gruesome death of this section. Similar to strangulation, the next category is drowned out, where Moleman dies from being submerged in a large body of liquid, usually water. The less gruesome death in this category is from gorillas on the mast. When Homer buys a boat after a lifelong dream, he realizes that owning a boat is not all it's cracked up to be. Moleman is subsequently on a surfboard that's broken by Maggie, and he slowly sinks into the ocean, slowly drowning to death. Drowning is definitely not fun, and drowning in the ocean is absolutely up there, but it's not as gruesome as this next one. The more gruesome death in this category is from MyPods and broomsticks. When Bart makes friends with a Muslim boy at school, Homer grows paranoid that his father is a terrorist. This causes him to accidentally blow up a bridge that leads to the Duff factory. One of the drivers to this factory was Hans Moleman, and he falls into the river. Homer dives in and saves the beer, leaving Moleman to drown to death. This is more gruesome simply because he could have been saved easily, but was left there to die by Homer. The category with the most Moleman deaths is this next one, non-romantic crushes, where Moleman is crushed by something, usually from above, such as being run over. The least gruesome death actually comes from the Simpsons movie. While Homer is trying to dump Plopper's silo in the lake after it had been banned by the city, many signs and barriers had been put up around it. Homer, of course, ignores all of these, and while going to dump the silo, he runs over and seemingly kills Moleman, completely ignoring him. This is the least gruesome simply due to the fact that it's straight up played mostly for laughs, rather than being a sad or gruesome moment. Next up on our list is from the section The Fourth Thursday After Tomorrow, from the episode Thanksgiving of Horror. Homer orders an AI that's stylized after Marge to cook Thanksgiving dinner in her place. We briefly get to see Hans Moleman walking down the street, where he's swiftly run over by an automated pizza delivery car. Much like the previous, this is played mostly for laughs, but at least we get to watch the whole action from a third-person perspective, making it slightly more gruesome. The next death on the list is from the Fool Monty. When a fake disease is created, Mr. Burns cuts the line for the required vaccine by driving through a crowd. In this crowd is none other than Hans Moleman, who is quickly run over by Smithers so that Burns could get all the doses necessary. This one's not really played for laughs, and therefore we consider it a bit more gruesome. Now we have the only death from a couch gag, specifically from Exit Through the Quickie Mart. In a parody of the Game of Thrones intro, Springfield's brought to life through a multitude of golden gears. One of the people brought to life is Moleman, who is quickly killed by the giant Lard Lad statue. The statue of Lard Lad comes to life and rolls his giant donut along the ground, which runs over and crushes Moleman while rolling him away. We now get away from the running over deaths as we talk about the man who grew too much. While selling porcelain figures in the town square, Sideshow Bob drops a cinder block from high above that quickly crushes Moleman under its weight. However, because it doesn't cover his entire body when it crushes him, it's considered less gruesome than other deaths. A similar one, though, is from The Squirt and the Whale. After a whale ends up beached on the beach of Springfield due to a violent windstorm, Lisa and others want to save the whale. However, after the whale dies, the police blow it up, and one of the large chunks of whale falls from the sky and lands straight on Moleman. The flaming piece of whale crushing Moleman is definitely more brutal than the previous death on the list, hence where we placed it. The final death from above is from the episode E Pluribus Wiggum. When Homer fails to dispose of his garbage in the correct way, battery acid eats into a gas main and causes a massive explosion that destroys all of Fast Food Boulevard. This leads to a massive chunk of concrete that falls from the sky and completely crushes Moleman to death. Unlike the previous two, his entire body is crushed underneath the item instead of some or even most of his body being crushed, hence why it ranks above the previous two on our list. The next crushing death on our list is in the episode King Lear. When Moe's dad finally contacts him after many years to take over one of his businesses, Moe cautiously accepts. His siblings soon try to sabotage his beds in many different ways, one of which is an automatic bed that opens and closes. It's sabotaged by opening and closing far too much and too quickly. This causes the bed to repeatedly crush Moleman to death. leaving him pretty much a pretzel. However, it's not as gruesome as his death in Bart vs. Itchy and Scratchy. After an all-female reboot of Itchy and Scratchy comes out, Lisa uploads Bart's reaction to it to show his hypocrisy. This eventually gets shown on the show Josh.0, where we also see Moleman die. Moleman is on a treadmill going slowly when a boat comes out of nowhere and crushes him against the treadmill, leaving him as nothing but a bloody stain. But the most gruesome death of this category comes from the segment Don't Have a Cow, Mankind, from Treehouse of Horror 20. After Krusty makes burgers using tainted burger meat, the entire town is turned into zombies named Munchers. However, when Apu saves the Simpsons from the Munchers, he knocks a zombie mole man to the ground and runs his head over with his truck. When the head is crushed underneath the tire, it sends his brain, glasses, and dentures flying out of his head. It's definitely gruesome. As we wind down from such a large category, we move on to the next one, Explosive Personality, where Mole Man dies from an explosion of some kind. The less gruesome death of this category is from the episode Look Who's Coming to Criticize Dinner. When Homer becomes a food critic, he starts to anger most of the food community into attempting to murder him. They create a massive eclair known as the La Bomba that was made to kill Homer. Well, when the La Bomba is thrown, it doesn't get Homer, but instead explodes Mole Man's gruel stand while he's standing behind it, and he's of course caught in the explosion, killing him. However, the more gruesome death of this category is from the segment Terror at 5.5 Feet, from Treehouse of Horror 4. When a gremlin is on the side of the school bus, Bart alerts Otto. However, he instead sees Mole Man driving a car known as a gremlin. This causes Otto to slam into Mole Man's car, sending him into a tree, causing an explosion that then kills Mole Man. This one's more gruesome due to the fact that it is a contained area he's in when he explodes instead of an open field. We now reach the penultimate category in this list, that being Disco Inferno, where Mole Man dies from incineration or the like. The less gruesome death in this burning category is from Bart of Darkness. With a heat wave going through the city, Mole Man walks into the heat of the day. He complains about the heat and says the sun is certainly doing its job. He then extends his glasses. This causes the sun to use his glasses like a magnifying glass that catches his shirt on fire. He simply stands defeated and doesn't take off his shirt, certainly burning to death. The more gruesome death in this category is also his first, in the episode Homer's Triple Bypass. Mole Man is tasked with the job of driving Edgar Allan Poe's historic home seemingly across the country. Well, Homer accidentally slams into it, which causes Mole Man to go over a cliff, while the house and car burn around him. This is more brutal because he's fully caught in the fire, and it's a much more confirmed death. We finally reach the most gruesome deaths on this list, those of course being the cruel deaths. The least gruesome of these goes to There Will Be Buds. After many of the kids get seemingly injured while playing football, all the concerned mothers go to the hospital to get them treated. In the emergency room, we see Mole Man impaled by a sword. He doesn't get treatment from the doctors on account of the aforementioned concerned mothers, and he likely dies from bleeding out before doctors can see him. One of Mole Man's saddest deaths is next in the Springfield Connection. After Marge becomes a police officer and arrests Homer for parking illegally, buying underage bullies beer, and resisting arrest, Homer eats Mole Man's last meal. This leads to Mole Man being walked to the execution room, where he's then executed via electric chair for unknown reasons. The next death on our list comes from Team Homer. While Mr. Burns is a little out of it, Homer obtains money for his bowling team. This leads Homer to suggest Mole Man try and get money from him as well. However, Mr. Burns instead drills Mole Man through the skull with an electric drill and kills him, apparently damaging or straight up destroying his brain.
Oh no, my brains.
The last assumed death on our list is in 'Tis the 15th Season. While all the townsfolk are in the center of town celebrating Christmas, Mole Man shoots a flare into the sky to try and get help. Everyone ignores this as they think it's a star. However, Mole Man does need help as he's trapped on a mountain. A pack of wolves then surround him, and it's quite obvious they kill and eat him because he is not seen for the rest of the episode.
Oh, thank goodness, rescue dogs.
The next death is sort of similar to the previous, and it happens in Double Double Boy in Trouble. After a series of unfortunate events that cause the family to be fed up with Bart's antics, Lenny invites them to a posh party. At said party, Bart reprograms a bunch of vacuum-bots that run rampant. They find and attack Moleman, completely destroying every inch of him, except for his glasses. He's sucked up into these vacuums and is seriously dead. It's just slightly outclassed by one kill. Moleman's most gruesome death in the series happens in the segment The Ned Zone from Treehouse of Horror 15. When Ned Flanders gets the ability to see the death of someone by touching them, he touches poor Moleman, seeing him getting eaten alive by alligators. This then quickly comes true when he falls into a manhole and is subsequently torn apart by said alligators. There's no question that this is the most gruesome death because we see them tear him apart. We guess it's true what they say, no one is gay for Moleman except death. He's died in plenty of gruesome ways, but which is your favorite?
The Simpsons, at its core, is about a dysfunctional family designed to disrupt the typical family sitcom plots. So this means that the Simpsons and their friends have committed a lot of crimes.
It's all my fault my wife got mugged.
But because of its status quo nature, punishments only last an episode. But what if the characters had to answer for their crimes? Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and today we're sentencing the Simpsons characters for their crimes. Court is in session. Like our other series-based installments, we're going to be tackling characters for their crimes committed in specific episodes and situations, as that opens the door to a more nuanced discussion of specific crimes and events. But occasionally, we will be looking at a couple of overarching crimes seen throughout the series. Alright, let's bring our first defendant. We're going to be starting with Homer Simpson, from the season 20 episode, My Pods and Boomsticks. In this episode, he goes into some unique plot points. The episode is about Homer committing hate crimes towards a Muslim family from Jordan. Among these crimes are of course his stalking of Amit and Mina to prove that they're terrorists. He's kind of forced into a conspiracy by Moe and Lenny to try and kill the family, which later results in him actively attempting it. He bakes a poison cake and tries to force the family to eat it. So either they cut into a cake that looks like the American flag and he can call them terrorists, or they don't and he can call them terrorists.
What's the matter? Don't like the taste of freedom?
It's also implied that he would have had them eat the cake, and this would, for all intents and purposes, be considered attempted murder. Homer's intentions stem from propaganda, which he easily buys into because he's a man of Homer Simpson's intelligence.
Did you factor in one bald idiot?
Then Homer takes the explosives, which were originally placed to properly and safely destroy the old Springfield Mall, and throws it onto the Springfield Bridge. Homer's punishment would likely be very severe. For attempted murder and harassment, reckless endangerment, and stealing explosives, Homer would receive 25 years in prison with no parole. Next is Marge Simpson in the episode The Strong Arms of the Ma from season 14. Marge gets mugged and then decides to bulk up because she developed agoraphobia. After she starts working out, she starts to utilize her strength in a variety of ways, starting off with assault and battery. First, by confronting the mugger and beating him silly.
Not anymore!
At the end of the episode, she continues her reign by starting a massive bar fight that includes slamming a jukebox over Disco Stew's head. In fact, she assaults and nearly kills over a dozen people during this fight. This also starts with a death threat. She threatens to kill Moe and then breaks a jar with the intent to stab him in the throat. There is also the illegal steroid use. And then Marge violates Homer and forces herself onto him. Homer clearly and concisely tells her that he wasn't interested in snuggling with her, but she tells him that she, quote, wasn't asking, which was certainly a dark side of Marge we've never seen before. So we're gonna give Marge 18 years in prison without parole. Now we have Bart Simpson in the season 22 episode, Homer the Father. But before we get into the actual crimes of Bart in this episode, we need to talk about El Barto and his consistent crimes throughout the series. The crimes he commits are actually light, usually just disturbing the peace with his multiple pranks, targeted harassment with his prank calls to Moe, and of course his El Barto graffiti. None are the most notable crimes, but considering how pervasive they are throughout the series, it makes sense that he would be criminally liable for these. Now most of these are because he's acting out, and some of the episodes tackle that. He is still young and wants attention. However, that doesn't justify what he does in this episode specifically. Because Homer has started watching 80s sitcoms, he's picked up on those parenting techniques. He convinces Bart to study for a test under the assumption that he'll get the dirt bike that he wants.
I did it! I got an A!
When he doesn't get what he wants, he decides the best way to get back at his father is to commit treason against the country by selling nuclear secrets to China. You know, typical adolescent shenanigans.
Aha! Typical American treachery!
Not only is this extremely stupid, but extremely destructive. This is a massive federal crime, and the only reason it doesn't work is because of Homer's own stupidity. No matter how you slice it, Bart has committed a massive crime, and his punishment may be lighter due to his age, but it would likely still be at least 20 years in federal prison due to the severity of these crimes. In most treason cases, the punishment would be death, so this is a light punishment. Now we have Mr. Burns and the computer who wore Menace shoes from season 12. Mr. Burns doesn't have a lot of screen time in this episode, but considering the depths of the crimes, it's worth pointing out. Burns could be considered a career criminal by a lot of people, as most of the crimes he commits are hard to pin him on. But upon watching other episodes, a couple of crimes stand out. First, without fail, he abuses his employees, whether that be by forcing them to spin the wheel that turns the cupcakes or selling all their clothes while they shower. Then, of course, is the pollution that we talked about in the previous video. It's a major part of most Mr. Burns episodes, except strangely this one, and since it's so prevalent, it needs to be mentioned here. However, in this episode, he commits treason and was arrested by the FBI.
Don't worry about those fumes. They'll be sucked into that air vent.
He was selling plutonium to terrorists, which is obviously used to create nuclear arms, and he seems to do it just because he can. I mean, there are no other reasons we can possibly find for him to do these things. Of course, beyond the money he would probably get. It's obvious that his punishment would likely be an execution, although it's hard to say what would kill this man. This is a usual punishment for treason, and considering everything else he's done, it makes sense for this to be the end for Montgomery Burns. Before we get to the last two characters, if you're digging these sentencing videos for animated characters here on Wicked Binge, consider subscribing to our new Cinema Sentencing channel, where we sentence characters from live-action movies and TV shows. Next, we have Mo in the classic Season 7 episode, Radioactive Man. Mo doesn't appear for very long, but he's on the list not only for the heinous crime, but also because he's one of the few characters with a consistent crime to talk about. That, of course, being his very detailed and intense death threats, both to Bart whenever he's prank called, but also to random bar patrons when he brandishes his shotgun for no reason.
Oh, wait a minute. Jockstrap. It's you, isn't it, you cowardly little runt?
However, in this episode, we learn of his past and his most gruesome crime, the murder of the original Alfalfa, due to this orphan owned by the studio supposedly stealing his joke.
Yeah, luckily Alfalfa was an orphan owned by the studio.
He results in assaulting and then murdering this child. Mo does this because he's angry, with no real reasoning behind it, though he would get some leeway because he was a child when it happened. So, Mo receives 20 years in prison with the potential of parole. And finally, we have Sideshow Bob in Season 3's classic, Black Widower. Bob is one of those characters who pops up on these lists all the time for the multitude of crimes he's committed. But unlike others, he doesn't have a consistent crime to talk about because even his most famous criminal action, which is threatening Bart Simpson, doesn't consistently happen until after this episode.
Well, Bart, any last requests?
In the episode, Bob intends to marry Selma and murder her for her money. So of course, he'd be on the line for conspiracy to commit murder, which is of course a crime in its own respect, but considering he gets close, that's also attempted murder. It gets to the point that he assaults the employee who gave them their room, considering he wanted a room with a fireplace. This includes hitting him multiple times with a rolled up newspaper. His attempted murder was well planned, but considering that Bart was able to deduce it, it luckily never gets to actual murder. But it does get to the point of arson and destruction of property when he blows up the room. This lands Bob a sentence of 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole, because it's a pretty cut and dry case. Next, we have Bart Simpson, and though it was difficult, we've chosen Marge Be Not Proud, which is Season 7, Episode 11. Bart is the resident prankster and a general nuisance, but nowhere is he more remorseful and thus more interesting than in Marge Be Not Proud. In this episode, he shoplifts a game called Bone Storm. What puts a kick to his butt when it comes to criminal charges are his destruction of evidence, when he hides Bronca's voicemail from his parents so they won't find out about the shoplifting. He also trespasses when his family all but forces him to enter the shopping safe after being banned from it.
I thought I told you. No returns for busted merchandise.
Luckily, none of these crimes are really that big of a deal, and he learns his lesson. So we're sentencing Bart to 1 week of being grounded. Sorry, Bart. Up next is Mo in Season 9's Dumbbell Indemnity. Mo finally gets a girlfriend in this this episode, and when he realizes he's low on money, he decides to fix this with a bevy of crimes. So, we'll start off where the episode does. During the montage where Mo and Renee start dating, we see a scene where he bribes a guard at SeaWorld so the two can ride Willie the Orca. Bribery is a crime, and based on the way the scene is framed, that's obviously what happened. The plot of the episode then focuses on Mo's plan to commit insurance fraud by destroying his car.
Insurance company pays off 5,000 clams.
He succeeds in this by aiding and abetting Homer's Grand Theft Auto and subsequent property damage. When Homer's put in jail for this, he then attempts to grave rob and commit arson. This doesn't go as planned, but he does indeed accidentally commit arson and ends up burning down his bar, nearly killing himself, Homer, and Barney. At the end of the episode, Homer allows Mo to operate his tavern out of his home. However, due to almost everything being burned in the fire, that means that Mo is selling alcohol without a license. This is a serious crime and could send him away for a while, so we're sentencing Mo to 7 years in prison with a chance at parole. Now we have Mr. Burns in Season 2, Episode 4, 2 cars at every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. Mr. Burns is attempting to become governor, just to change the rules so he can skirt the law. So, in the episode, Mr. Burns abuses his power and commits corruption, but he's also committed acts of pollution, which lead to the mutation of animals around his plant, which would be considered destruction of nature. He also attempted bribery when trying to get rid of the story, and early on tries to commit extortion.
This is exactly the kind of trickery I'm paying you for.
Even if he wasn't malicious, he would definitely be on the line for criminal negligence. At the very end of the episode, he then goes and destroys a bunch of the Simpsons' property because he was angry. For all these many crimes, Mr. Burns receives 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Next is Krusty the Clown from Season 4's premiere, Camp Krusty. Krusty is behind Camp Krusty, and while he doesn't appear for most of the episode, he racks up many crimes throughout the episode. First, he'd be on the line for false advertising because his ads for the camp are completely false. Thanks to the way the camp works, he would also be on the line for child endangerment and criminal neglect, as that's the major part of his scam. He'd be in trouble for product liability or knowingly selling defective products, among the things including an alarm clock that gets scorching hot if plugged in. He commits assault when he punches someone directly in the face.
Out of my way, you parasite! I said out of my way!
And finally, at the very end, he commits human trafficking as he takes a large group of children across the border without permission or passports. And if this wouldn't be considered human trafficking, it would be kidnapping. And he participates in cockfighting, which is illegal in the States. Krusty's punishment will likely include 15 years in prison with no parole and paying back everyone's deposits for the camp and any other defective products. Alright, before we get to the last 2 characters, if you really like these sentencing videos for animated characters here on Wicked Binge, consider subscribing to our new Cinema Sentencing channel, where we sentence characters from live-action movies and TV shows. Up next is Mona Simpson in her debut episode, Season 7, Episode 8, or Mother Simpson. Mona is interesting because she's been on the run from the law for a long time. According to the backstory, she abandons Homer, which is of course child abandonment, and commits chemical warfare, releasing a chemical that destroys all the biological weaponry in Burns' command. So this would either be a federal crime or potentially a war crime. Then of course, there's her use of fake IDs and her evading arrest. She may be on the line for federal crimes because the biological warfare that Burns was part of may have been financed by the FBI, considering they're hunting her down.
At any rate, the FBI will track down this mystery woman and put her behind bars.
We believe that 15 years in federal prison with no chance at parole is the fairest punishment. Now we have Hank Scorpio from Season 8's You Only Move Twice. Hank Scorpio is Homer's new boss during the events of this episode, head of the Globex Corporation and a supervillain. Hank's plans are actually wide and seem to come out of some innate need for world domination. This leads to him threatening world leaders and trying to extort money out of them, and when they refuse, he destroys bridges so he can prove a point. His continued terroristic actions leads to him committing acts of assault and murder, such as with the James Bond parody that he orders killed.
I don't expect anything from you except to die and be a very cheap funeral.
Hank is basically waging war on multiple governments, including the UN and likely the US government, and would therefore be under scrutiny for treason. And while that should be his worst crime, somehow it's not. And at the end of the episode, thanks to a newspaper clip and the choice of team Hank has, it turns out he's taken over the eastern seaboard. This is a crime known as annexation, where he takes over a portion of another country in a physical manner, usually with a massive weaponry. Hank Scorpio is a supervillain and is a Simpsons version of Lex Luthor and should be punished accordingly. Hank Scorpio should be executed publicly via lethal injection. And finally, we're gonna finish with Anthony Fat Tony D'Amico in Season 8's The Twisted World of Marge Simpson. Fat Tony is the head head of the Springfield mob and a consistent part of the show that makes every episode he's in 10 times better. In this episode, he's paid by Homer to threaten and destroy any competition to Marge. He knocks over Moleman's hot dog cart, makes Skinner buy pretzels at gunpoint, and blows up the falafel truck that started this. This is all considered predatory business practices and organized crime, and this leads to him committing acts of bribery and kidnapping to help Marge. But by the end of the episode, on the subject of the pretzel monies, he tries to extort the money from Marge to no avail.
We are entitled to a percentage of your profits.
On the basis of just this episode, we have to say he should be in prison for the next 15 years without parole. Next is Lisa Simpson from the episode Wild Barts Can't Be Broken. This episode is unique because it features the whole town having a curfew for the children, and upon deciding to fight back, they're clearly breaking the law. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Lisa clearly breaks curfew during the episode, and as such would be legally liable. However, she's also on the line for aiding and abetting Nelson's destruction of property when he pulls up a part of the gate to let her through. She's also part of the unauthorized radio operation to use against the adults. This is an FCC violation, although it's hard to say if they would find out about this or even prosecute this. Later, she's among those who help in the theft of many parts needed for the plan they had concocted. That plan, which is revealing secrets of the adults, in itself doesn't seem to be breaking any laws, and in fact, may be exactly what the police would want, as it would help them track down criminals. However, since they use it to get the curfew lifted, this is blackmail, and as such, would likely be prosecuted. In fact, we believe that 2 months in juvie would be a perfect amount of time for the crime she had committed. Next is Chief Clancy Wiggum in the episode Sky Police. Wiggum only has a major part during the first act. During the events of the episode, he fails to provide assistance to those in danger, as he doesn't go with Lou and Eddie to stop the sniper. He commits identity theft by pretending to be Clancy Wiggins, so he can open his mail without any repercussions.
Of course I'm Clancy Wiggins, you idiot!
This leads to him utilizing a jetpack meant for the military, and he does this without a license, which is distinctly mentioned. When he has the jetpack, he disturbs the peace, destroys property, and even incites a jailbreak. When the episode wraps up, Wiggum commits 2 more heinous acts, including the kidnapping and what may be considered assault of Nelson, by bringing him up high enough to need a breathing mask. Second, he murders 2 graffiti artists by dropping down and grinding them with the propellers. One may call this manslaughter, but according to the song he sings, Drop Down on Their Heads, they won't even know why they're dead. It implies it was entirely accidental.
Squash perps on their heads, they won't know why they're dead.
So we have to say that Wiggum deserves nothing less than life in prison without parole. Next is Chief Wiggum's wife, Sarah Wiggum, in Season 32, Episode 17, Uncut Femmes. Sarah Wiggum is the wife of Chief Wiggum and the mother of Ralph, and while she's not utilized often, in this episode, we learn a lot about her backstory. Before we even get to her backstory, she's tampered with military clocks and committed the act of theft from the captain of the boat via lockpicking. After we learn more about her, it turns out she used to be part of a group of criminals who pull off a multitude of heists in her past. This includes conspiracy to commit grand larceny when it comes to the hourglass diamond that they got betrayed over.
My best friends were arrested.
They also then successfully commit grand larceny by stealing a bat from the trader. At the end of the episode, she's also responsible for framing Nagel for a completely new set of theft and gets away scot-free. Sarah's crimes are small potatoes compared to others, but based on them, 5 years in prison with a chance of parole is the best sentence. Moving on to Cecil Terwilliger from Season 8's Brother from Another Series. Cecil is a younger brother of Sideshow Bob, who takes up a villain role in his debut episode. While most of the episode shows him having a relatively non-villainous plan to build a dam for Springfield, by the end of it, it becomes revealed. Cecil commits an attempted populicide, trying to wipe out the entire population of Springfield by drowning and destroying them using the dam he was building. This was attempted using planned obsolescence, or intentionally building something with a limited use or shelf life. He also tried to criminally frame Sideshow Bob, which would have made Bob's already bad reputation worse.
The one who's been working at the dam and has a grudge against Springfield?
Cecil is less of a criminal mastermind than his brother, but considering the atrocity he was planning to commit, all came about because he was jealous that Bob became Krusty's sidekick, so there's no good reason for this. Because of his crimes, it's obvious that he should be sentenced to death, preferably via the electric chair. Next is Russ Cargill from the Simpsons movie. Russ is the head of the EPA and seemingly very concerned for the environment when it comes to the city of Springfield. Due to the events of the film, he uses his direct line with the president to figure out a proper solution to the problem.
So here is our chance to kick some ass.
This solution is placing a massive dome over the town, which is of course false imprisonment. After imprisoning everyone, he then uses the president's supposed stupidity against him by basically forcing his hand to destroy the town, an attempted populicide that would likely have unintended consequences. However, he tries to cover it up, and this would likely be considered treason considering the events that lead up to it. He kidnaps the Simpsons family, abuses his power, is obviously corrupt, and does all of this for his own political gain, making it terrorism.
Because I'm a rich man who wanted to give something back, not the money.
Russ attempted to annihilate an entire town, and the only reason he's not vilified more is because it's done in the name of helping the environment. Usually, eco-terrorism is the right idea done in the wrong way, but in this case, his solution is so horrible, there's no way you can agree with it. Russ is a maniac of the highest order, and his crimes are so blatant and so evil that his punishment would be severe. Russ's punishment is a public execution, likely by the president, with the electric chair. The final criminal of the day is Kostas Becker from series Flanders, Part 1 and Part 2. Kostas was a member of the capital city mob and engaged in their organized crime tactics by becoming a debt collector for them. His job was based around threats, blackmail, and extortion, and throughout his time there, he got into a firefight with the Sislak brothers. After losing his money, thanks to the Flanders' father, he tries to extract it from his son, Ned.
This is now your debt to me.
This, of course, leads to him kidnapping, stalking, and torturing Homer to draw out Ned. Kostas is a man who cares about his debt being paid, and because he cares so much, he goes on what is essentially a murder spree to get some money back. He likes order and his place in that order.
At every other time, do expect it.
However, he was nearly never caught, and since he didn't survive in those episodes, he definitely couldn't face justice. What would be the most just? Well, there are one of two possibilities, and considering his motives were more than money, one comes to mind. He would be executed, and because of the nature of the episode, it would be via firing squad. Bart and Lisa have had multiple love interests over the years. These relationships range from amazing and healthy down to toxic waste levels of awful. And today, we'll be discussing Bart's relationships. We're gonna start with the best of the best and move down. These are the healthy. Starting off our list, the gold medal of healthiness goes to Bart and Mary Spuckler. Mary is Bart's major love interest, appearing in 3 major roles and a multitude of cameos. She and Bart first meet in Season 19's Apocalypse Cow, where she helps Bart in caring for his cow, Lou. And to save Lou from a slaughterhouse, Bart takes Lou to Mary. This leads to Bart being forced to marry her due to the law of the hill folk, although they call off the wedding.
All right, sir. I'll marry your daughter.
However, Bart and Mary are quite good together as they share some interest and are obviously interested in each other to some degree. However, in her most recent major appearance, Bart and Mary really start dating, but Bart starts to ignore her and neglect her. It's because he's a 10-year-old boy, it's to be expected from him. Bart does really care about Mary and even tries to get back together with her at the end of the episode, but we never see where this leads. Sure, Bart is not the best in relationships, but they are the closest it gets to perfect in Bart's repertoire. Taking the silver medal is Bart and Laura Powers. Laura is Bart's earliest romantic interest, appearing in Season 4's New Kid on the Block, where she was babysitting Bart and Lisa. Now Laura is a bit older than Bart, and this is really a one-sided crush for the most part. Laura is attracted to bad boys like Jimbo, and this does make Bart feel like his heart was destroyed when he found out. Yes, Bart does cause Maude to come over in a rage and nearly kill Jimbo, but we're not accounting for that just right now. The thing is, Laura does say that if Bart were older, maybe they would date, which shows that despite what may be a bit of attraction on her part, she has a standard not to date a 10-year-old boy.
If you were only old enough to grow a bad teenage mustache.
They rank this high because they don't have a lot of stuff to go over, but Laura is a good person and a much better, older girl for Bart, as we'll see later. The bronze medal of healthiness goes to Bart and Sherry Terry. Now we say Sherry/Terry because it's unclear which of the two he's most romantically involved with. In Season 12's Hungry Hungry Homer, he goes to a dance with one of them, and the two are mentioned to have been together by Homer at one point.
Well, Bart's not so bad.
Even in the admittedly non-canon Barthood, he's seen making out with one of them. The problem is that even though this relationship is mentioned repeatedly, including one of the twins having a crush on Bart, they're not really fully together, so we have to give them bronze because there's nothing toxic about these relationships, but they're not full ones either. Rounding out the good section is Bart and Gina Vendetti. Bart and Gina get together in season 15's The Wandering Juvie, when the two of them are both in juvenile detention. They are essentially forced together because of a juvie dance that is supposed to introduce the boys to the girls. They both escape juvie, and Bart, being a 10-year-old, doesn't understand her few advances. Bart and her split up after a kiss, and their handcuffs are broken, and it's revealed that Gina doesn't have a family to go to.
They're imaginary, like your brain.
Bart tries to cheer her up, and in the end, Gina takes the fall for him, even if he didn't ask her to. They seem to end on a good note, but when she appears later in season 24's Moonshine River, she punches Bart in the face. So it's unknown exactly how she feels about him. They were forced together, and they land here in the end because while she doesn't seem to not like him anymore, she did sacrifice her freedom for him. With the best out of the way, we can now move on down to a slightly worse section of the list. This is the gray area. Starting off the gray section, we have Bart and Nikki McKenna. Bart meets Nikki McKenna in the season 21 episode Stealing First Base. Bart flirts with her and tries to get with her, although at first she seems disgusted with him. Nikki's whole thing is that she's hot and cold with Bart, at one moment kissing him and the next screaming in disgust.
Oh my god, and that was my first kiss!
Nikki mostly confuses and annoys Bart. She does save his life with CPR and continues to flip-flop between hating and loving him in Moonshine River, showing she may have some bipolar issues. Nikki, as we said, did save Bart's life, which stops him from falling any further, but the two are a very weird case. Next, we have Bart and Greta Wolfcastle. Bart and Greta initially get together in the season 13 episode, The Bart Wants What It Wants, when Bart saves her from being bullied. Bart pretty much ignored her during their relationship, calling her too needy, leading to the two breaking up and then Bart trying to get her back.
Please be my girlfriend again.
They don't date for very long, but Bart and Milhouse end up making Greta not want to date for a while. It's no surprise they land in the gray because they are very obviously not very good together. Next, we have Bart and Jenny. Bart meets Jenny while at the Springfield retirement castle and tries to date her. But upon realizing that she was a really nice person, he tries to convince her that he's also a good person.
If those ducklings understood how magnificent you were.
He does well in tricking her, but Milhouse reveals his true state, causing them to break up. The problem here is that Bart tries to trick Jenny into dating him, which is a really toxic thing. However, there is so much worse to be talked about, so they can't rank lower. Rounding out the gray section, we have Bart and Melanie Juniper. This is another short-lived relationship from the season 22 episode, Flaming Moe. Bart starts dating Melody not out of his own volition, but is forced to by Principal Seymour Skinner. This is because Skinner wanted to date Melody's mother, which did work out in his favor. However, this leads to a relationship that is little more than a ploy for a different relationship, and Bart ends it swiftly.
I see you as more of a sister.
But at the very least, it isn't abusive, so we won't rank it lower. Now we can talk about the bottom of the barrel. These are the toxic. Starting off the toxic section, we have Bart and Darcy. Darcy's first and only major appearance is in season 18's Little Big Girl. When Bart gets the ability to drive a car again, he ends up meeting Darcy and lying about his age. He definitely seems to care for Darcy, but Darcy only really dates him because she feels the need for someone to raise her child. She instantly uses his car and supposed age to do so, even forcing him to drive to a state so they can get married, even after she finds out his real age.
It's just... I'm only 10 years old.
This is another relationship built on lies, and Darcy is a bit abusive, such as what happens with the strawberry situation. She's also amongst the exes that appear in Moonshine River that slam the door in his face, showing they're not that good of a combination. The next relationship is between Bart and Annika Van Houten. Annika and Bart meet in season 26, Let's Go Fly Coot. This is another situation where it's mostly a one-sided crush from Bart's perspective, as Annika is much older than him and is also the cousin of his friend Milhouse. Annika doesn't seem to care too much about him and even starts to get him to smoke, which is bad for him and his health. At the end of the episode, Bart reveals he doesn't like her anymore because of her personality, which offends her, but she is sent back to the Netherlands.
I'm really relieved you're leaving.
The fact that this isn't a real relationship is what stops them from falling lower, but they're pretty close to the bottom. The bronze medal of toxicity goes to Bart and Jenda. This is the only relationship we'll be talking about regarding the future episodes of The Simpsons, as it's the only known Bart future relationship, although you can count Sherry, Terry, and Barthood. Jenda first appears in the season 16 episode Future Drama as Bart's then girlfriend in high school, going to the dance together. Bart and Jenda have an on and off relationship throughout the multitude of future episodes. She breaks up with him in Future Drama because he decides to give up his scholarship to Lisa. She gives him ultimatums, and although they get back together and have children, she divorces him. However, we do have to give her this. She tries her best to keep Bart and their children's lives, despite how bad their relationship is, and she tries her best to be a good person in their interactions. They only grab bronze because it's obvious they're bad for each other and shouldn't be together, but they seem to get along well enough. Stealing the silver medal of toxicity are Bart and Shauna Chalmers. Shauna has been a recurring character on the show since surprisingly late in the show's run, first appearing in season 20's The Good, the Sad, and the Drugly. However, the episode we'll be focusing on is season 23's Beware My Cheating Bart, where Jimbo hires Bart to chaperone Shauna while Jimbo does stuff without her. Shauna falls for Bart after he stands up to protect her. Bart convinces Shauna to leave Jimbo because he doesn't respect her, and she flashes her chest to him, which is sort of illegal. Lisa, the smart one, actually forces them to split up because it was the best for everyone, especially considering the age gap. Shauna and Bart do kiss once more later on in the season 25 episode, What to Expect When Bart's Expecting, which shows the two actually having a decent relationship still, which stops them from falling lower. Considering their age gap, the illegal actions on Shauna's part, and the slightly coercive circumstances, we have to rank them here. The gold medal of toxicity goes to Bart and Jessica Lovejoy, Bart's earliest real relationship. Jessica's first and only real major appearance is season 6 Bart's Girlfriend, where she's the titular character and antagonist. Jessica is the daughter of Reverend Lovejoy and is supposedly a perfect angel. However, it becomes obvious that this isn't the case, because not only is she attracted to Bart's bad boy persona, and Jessica is just as bad.
You're bad, and I like it.
At first, it seems like this would make them have a very good relationship, but then Jessica frames Bart for a crime she committed. She then uses her status as a perfect angel and Bart as a bad boy to frame him. This causes Bart to lose interest in her and then tries to frame her in response. However, two wrongs don't make a right, and these two are really bad for each other, hence their gold medal ranking. But don't leave yet, because we do have some sinner medals to hand out. Taking our Darwin medal is Bart and Melody, who were forced together, and Skinner should have seen this coming. Our Lust medal goes to Bart and Shauna, with one of the biggest moments being that she flashed her chest at him. Obvious Bart and Laura take our Envy medal, because Bart is obviously envious of Jimbo for being able to date Laura. The Sloth medal goes to Bart and Annika, because all Annika really does is lounge around and use Bart to buy cigarettes and e-cigarettes. Taking our Pride medal is Bart and Jessica, but mostly Jessica, who uses her status to frame Bart, which takes a lot of pride. And finally, our Wrath medal goes to Bart and Darcy, where we only really need one word to explain this: strawberries. In The Simpsons, almost every major character has had at least one romantic subplot, and in the case of Lisa Simpson, she's had a few. Dopey children of police chiefs, school bullies, and everything in between. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Lisa's love life. First, we'll talk about the best relationships. These are the healthy. The gold medal of health goes to Colin. Colin is a young man from the Simpsons movie. He's an Irish environmentalist and musician that Lisa falls in love with. He's shown to be very sweet and caring, and obviously cares for Lisa and her goals. He even tries his best to keep her okay during their escape with a new song he wrote for her. They get along very well, and even though he only appears in cameos after the movie, he's by far the best relationship for Lisa.
He's pure gold.
The silver medal of health goes to Thelonious. Thelonious is a short-lived romance from the iconic season 12 episode, Trilogy of Air, when Lisa goes to the wrong Springfield Elementary, where she meets Thelonious. They don't meet for long, and it's a love-at-first-sight thing for sure, but they're sweet for the short time we witness their relationship. Thelonious even tells Lisa that she shouldn't sacrifice her grades for romance, and they'll meet again in high school, which shows he wants Lisa to have her priorities straight. The bronze medal of health goes to Nelson Muntz. Nelson is a recurring bully who starts to date Lisa in Lisa's Date with Density. Nelson culls his bully tendencies as best as possible, trying to change for Lisa, even if it doesn't last very long. They break up because Nelson helps the other bullies throw expired coleslaw at Skinner's house. Throughout the rest of the series, their relationship is mentioned, and in episodes that look into the future, he's one of the more common relationships she ends up in. Nelson is a good guy at heart, at least when he's around Lisa, and shows he still cares about her in other episodes, like The Great Simpsina, where he threatens to burn ants to spite God if Lisa doesn't come back.
If you don't bring my Lisa back safe, ants will burn tonight.
Nelson cares a lot about Lisa, and this shows in later episodes. The episode, Barthood, shows one version of the future in which Lisa saves Nelson's life with the new surgery she helped create, and they get together. If it wasn't for the fact that Nelson has to change himself, both in the initial episode and in Barthood, to prove that he's worthy of Lisa in some way, they would likely rank higher. Nelson does have to change himself to be worthy of being with Lisa, which isn't the greatest, but Lisa seems to be doing it for not only Nelson's well-being, but to give back to his former victims. So while we don't love the idea of someone having to drastically change themselves if they want a relationship, Nelson seems to benefit from it. However, that doesn't stop them from not grabbing a higher ranking because it's still not the greatest for either of them to force change. Next is Jack DeForest. Jack is another child at Springfield Elementary who appears during the season 27 episode, The Burns Cage. He auditions to play Rick in the school's Casablanca play and easily takes the role, with Milhouse being his understudy.
Understudy? Both those words are horrible.
He doesn't date Lisa for very long, but he has amazing chemistry with her on stage, even if he was pretending to be Milhouse at the time. Sure, he gets kicked out of the play because he beats up the bullies who are sent after him, but despite all of this, he and Lisa are nice to each other, and by the end of the episode, he goes on a treasure hunt while seemingly still dating Lisa. The main problem with him is a lack of real romantic moments with Lisa. Other than that, he definitely has a pretty good relationship with her. Next is Brendan Biederbecky. Brendan is an 11-year-old jazz pianist voiced by Ed Sheeran in the season 29 episode Ha Ha Land. He meets Lisa at a STEM event, and they quickly realize how much they have in common, and they briefly date. Like a lot of her other relationships, while it's sweet, it doesn't last very long, as by the end of the episode, Brendan has to transfer to another school.
This young man does not live in the district.
They were very similar to Lisa and Colin's relationship, the main difference being that Brendan never really shows the same sort of affection towards Lisa as Colin did. Despite this, they're quite good for each other, even if they don't particularly last long. Why he lands lower than Jack is simply because while they have a lot in common, Jack seems to like Lisa more than Brendan, but it can go either way. Rounding out the healthy section is Lucas Bortner. Lucas is part of the season 25 episode Lucas, where he's training to be a competitive eater. Lucas, unlike other characters, accepts Lisa for all her faults, and this leads to Lisa and Lucas getting close. Lucas continues to train, and Lisa is more than willing to help him. However, they don't stay together long. Like other times, Lisa has a so-called vision of her future with Lucas, and she decides against dating him, deeming him as too slovenly and like her father. Because of this vision and Lisa's sort of pretentiousness regarding it, they barely survive enough to land in our healthy section. We now move on to the lesser-loved relationships. These are the gray. First in this section is Milhouse. Milhouse is a small character in the season 21 episode, Boy Meets Curl. He is the Canadian version of Milhouse and acts pretty much the same as him, instantly crushing on Lisa. However, this is a very one-sided relationship, as it's only a crush from Milhouse that is unrequited by Lisa. However, he ranks here because he doesn't do all the weird crazy stuff that Milhouse does that makes him rank lower. Next is one of Lisa's most iconic romances, Ralph Wiggum. Ralph is another second grader that is in Lisa's class, and during the season 4 episode, I Love Lisa, the two briefly get together. This is because Ralph didn't have any Valentine's Day cards from the other students, so she gives him the now iconic I choose you card, which leads Ralph to try and date her.
You choose me?
They're together for a short time, mostly thanks to Chief Wiggum. This gets to the point where Ralph has tickets to the Krusty the Clown show, and Lisa really doesn't want to go with him because she doesn't like him. She publicly blows up on him, breaking up with him on public television, which is not a great look for her. Ralph mentions their relationship at many other points in the show, which shows he knows enough to recognize what their relationship is. The end of the iconic episodes has them become friends once more, which shows that despite the very rough breakup and amazing play, they can manage to still be friends. Ralph and Lisa can't rank too much lower, only because Ralph's understanding of things is questionable at best and downright dumb at worst. Her other iconic relationship is with Milhouse Van Houten. Milhouse and Lisa have never actually fully dated on the show, but Milhouse has had a crush on Lisa for almost as long as he's been a character. Milhouse has tried to date Lisa in many different ways, whether that be public or private, but they've never fully gotten together, save for in the future. The future version of Lisa very obviously picked Milhouse as a last-ditch effort, but despite this, they have a daughter together, and they seem to care about each other to a degree. Although Lisa only shows real love for Milhouse when he becomes a zombie, which somehow makes him him better.
He's so much more interesting this way.
Milhouse gets immensely jealous and paranoid with Lisa, and it's not great for Lisa. However, Milhouse obviously cares about and loves Lisa, even if Lisa doesn't feel the same way, hence why we don't rank them any lower. Rounding out the gray area is Blake Black. He appears as part of the season 28 two-part special, The Great Fatsby. He's a rich kid who lives in the very rich part of town that Homer and family go to, while Homer tries to get Mr. Burns his riches back after he lost them all to mysterious music mogul JG. Lisa gets mad at Blake for cutting in line, and when he offers to buy everyone a cone, Lisa says no.
Boom!
This intrigues Blake because he's never dated anyone with morals, which is why he becomes so interested in Lisa. He tries everything to appeal to her morals when they go on their dates, although each time he fails miserably. Lisa abandons him for another boy who has the money and tickets to the pony show, which shows that unlike Milhouse, Lisa doesn't care about Blake in the slightest, hence their ranking. Now it's time for the worst. These are the toxic relationships. Starting off the category is Jesse Grass. Jesse is an environmentalist from the season 12 episode Lisa the Tree Hugger and is a so-called level 5 vegan, which means he won't anything that casts a shadow. Jesse leads a community of vegans known as Dirt First, and Lisa has a heavy crush on him. Jesse leads Lisa into tying herself to a tree and supposedly dying because she wanted to prove herself to him.
This was her choice, Mr. Simpson.
He's known for protesting fast food places like Krusty Burger in a cow suit and trying to convince others to join Dirt First. The main issue with this relationship, beyond the whole supposedly dying and subsequent lying to Jesse from Lisa, is the age gap. Lisa is an 8-year-old, and yes, she's dated and had crushes on older kids, but Jesse is a teenager. Not like a 13-year-old, but he looks and acts much closer to the 16 or 17-year-old area, which is a massive gap. That would make him double Lisa's age at this point in the show, and makes it completely unlikely they would ever date. The one saving grace is that Jesse doesn't show any romantic inclination towards Lisa, and it's just a one-sided crush. Next in the toxicity is Luke Stetson from the least Christmassy Christmas episode of The Simpsons. Luke appears during the season 14 episode, Dude, Where's My Ranch? Luke is a 13-year-old kid who works on a dude ranch out in the desert that the Simpsons go to later on in the episode. Lisa has an intense crush on him, and while Luke seems to like her to a degree, Lisa completely ruins her chances because near the end of the episode, she mistakes a conversation between Luke and his sister, Clara Stetson, as romantic.
Clara? He's got a girlfriend.
This leads Lisa into trying to put Clara on the wrong path, which almost leads her to her demise, and leads Luke to actively hate her despite her supposed apology. Luke seems like a good guy for the most part, but even that doesn't stop them from falling here. The bronze medal of toxicity goes to Edmund. Edmund is a major character from the season 22 episode Treehouse of Horror 21, specifically in the segment called Tweenlight. He appears throughout the segment, saving Lisa's life multiple times, causing Lisa to develop a crush on him. Edmund then takes Lisa out into the forest, revealing his fangs, and the fact that he's a vampire. This is when Lisa reveals she'd be willing to live forever as a vampire if he wished to bite her. However, there are a few issues with this. First, Lisa would then be physically 8 years old forever, which she obviously doesn't like. Second, like we talked about with Jesse, the age gap is much more important to take into account. Edmund is 400 years old, despite his 8-year-old body.
Dad, I don't need a chaperone.
That doesn't change the fact that he's been around for 400 years, which makes this relationship even more creepy. And finally, the worst problem is that Edmund tries to forcibly bite and transform Lisa after she already said she didn't want to become a vampire, which is a barely veiled allusion to assault. However, beyond this, Edmund seems sweet enough that he doesn't fall lower, but he was close. The silver medal of toxicity goes to Hugh Parkfield. Hugh is the main romantic interest from season 6, episode 19, Lisa's Wedding. When Lisa goes to a county renaissance fair, she meets a fortune teller who tells her that she may be able to tell her the true future of Lisa's love life. Said love life is supposedly going to end with Hugh Parkfield. Hugh is a British student who goes to the same college as Lisa. They meet in the school library when they both need the same book for a class. Hugh and Lisa absolutely despise each other at first, and it's obvious that they wouldn't work well together romantically. Even though their relationship has a glorious start, it quickly goes south as they prepare for the titular wedding. Hugh heads to America to meet Lisa's family, and while Hugh's family loves Lisa and she makes a good impression, it's quite the opposite for the Simpsons.
Here they come! Raise the flag!
dead!
The Simpsons mean well but end up disrespecting and disgusting Hugh, which leads him to trying to pull Lisa away from them. Lisa grows a spine and dumps Hugh after he utterly refuses to take part in only one of her family's traditions with Homer's cufflinks, which shows that her true love is actually her family. Lisa and Hugh are terrible for each other, and it's no surprise that they don't work out. The only reason they don't grab gold, and we mean the only reason, is because at least it's not a manipulative scandal like our final one. The gold medal of toxicity goes to Nick. Nick is from the season 23 episode The Daughter Also Rises, where he makes his one and only appearance. Voiced by Michael Cera, Lisa meets Nick in a special restaurant, and Nick immediately makes himself seem much better than he actually is. He tries to impress Lisa with a suave and confident personality that is in fact a facade used to trick Lisa. Nick tells her not to tell him her name since he wants the first place he hears it to be special. He also manages to come around at the best possible time, as his presence allows Lisa to take her focus off the bad events happening around her. The couple seemed good at first, and it isn't until Grandpa says that they need to kiss underneath the tree to seal their union forever.
Run, young lovers! I'll take care of the cops!
This then goes to show off Nick's actual insecure personality, as he isn't ready to commit to a relationship. By the end of the episode, Nick reveals that God gave him a gift to lie to the ladies, showing that not only was he knowingly lying to Lisa, but also had done it multiple times in the past. Nick is manipulative beyond belief, able to convince Lisa that he loves her when he actually doesn't, which makes this by far the worst relationship. But don't touch that dial and don't change the channel, because we've got some glorious center medals to hand out. Earning our Darwin medal for dumbest character goes to Ralph Wiggum. Undoubtedly, Ralph is so far behind the rest of his class that he can't be trusted with glue or safety scissors. However, he does seem to be emotionally intelligent to some degree. Milhouse takes the Lust medal for obvious reasons, because he falls in love with Lisa upon just meeting her for the first time. For our Wrath medal, it goes to Nelson Muntz. Nelson is a bully, wanting to punch and attack those around him, especially when Lisa is getting harmed. To no one's surprise, Lucas Bortner takes our Gluttony medal. Lucas is known for trying to become a competitive eater, so it's no surprise. The Greed medal goes to Blake Black. This is simply because of how rich he is and how much he's willing to throw around. And finally, our Pride medal belongs to Nick, who believes it's not only a good thing, but a gift to lie to women.
I've heard enough. Release the hounds.
We have an excellent video for you today, Simpsons fans. We're heading over to the Springfield nuclear power plant to discuss Montgomery Burns, Mr. Burns to you, the man who set the standard for comically greedy cartoon villains. Mr. Burns walks so Mr. Krabs could run, and he honestly makes the old crab look like a saint. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Mr. Burns' deeds, good to evil. While his good side is incredibly elusive and usually non-existent, we still got a few good deeds to talk about. First, babies can bring out the best in anyone, like when Mr. Burns tried to give Maggie his teddy bear. The episode, Rosebud, follows Mr. Burns' quest to find his childhood teddy bear, Bobo, after having abandoned it years ago. Over his decades-long journey, Bobo ultimately ends up in the possession of little Maggie Simpson, and this results in Burns spending most of the episode doing everything in his power to get him back. It culminates in them having a rather one-sided tug-of-war over the bear, but Burns relents, not that he had much of a choice, only asking Maggie to take care of Bobo and to not abandon him like he did.
Don't make the same mistake I made.
Much to his joy, Maggie gives him the bear back, maybe as a way to apologize in advance for shooting him in a later episode. If nothing else, it was nice that Burns just wanted his bear to be happy, even if he spent majority of the episode trying to get him back by ridiculous means. If only Smithers had a pen, he might have actually remembered his promise to only be nice and kind from then on. But he was still sometimes kind, like when he saved Springfield Elementary from debt. In the episode, Grift of the Magi, despite initially turning his back on the financial peril of the school, Burns comes through due to an Ebenezer Scrooge-esque epiphany. 3 ghosts end up visiting him, inspiring him to give the school the money it needs to get out of debt. Sure, it took a literal supernatural event to inspire Burns to dig into his incredibly huge stash of cash to save the school, but he still did it, right? It's not going to get him out of the nice list, but it at least gets him a little higher up on the naughty list. For this next one, we actually had to dig pretty far into Mr. Burns' past. Trying to bond with his son is Burns' Bronze Medal of good. In the episode Burns Baby Burns, it's revealed that Mr. Burns actually has a son from a decades past affair. While he initially wants nothing to do with Larry, he eventually makes a surprisingly genuine effort to bond with him. That said, his comedian son has a lot more in common with Homer than with his old man, much to Burns' chagrin. Sadly, Monty ultimately ends up disowning Larry, but not out of pure selfishness.
I can't be the family that you need.
He rather acknowledges that he could never be the father Larry needs. Even if it didn't work out, the fact that Burns made a legitimate effort to connect with an estranged son is rather admirable, at least by his standards. Next is Mr. Burns risking his life for his fiancée. While Burns is usually satisfied with his wealth and power alone, when a fortune cookie has him and Homer convinced that love is in his near future, he goes on a quest to find someone, and surprisingly, it's a success, as he ends up engaged to a gorgeous policewoman named Gloria.
I've never dated anyone with their original hair and teeth.
He earns even more points when she, alongside Homer, is kidnapped by her ex-boyfriend Snake Jailbird, and Burns risks his life to save her from a burning house, even though she ends up saving him instead. It really seems like Burns has turned over a new leaf here. Darn you for going back to Snake, Gloria. The world just doesn't want to give this man a chance at redemption. It's alright, Mr. Burns, even though you didn't find love, you always have your relationship with Waylon Smithers. You can't talk about Mr. Burns without mentioning his reliable right-hand man, Waylon Smithers. Like any cartoon villain, Burns often takes advantage of his associates, and while Smithers is by no means an exception, he's unique in that he's always an object of Burns' compassion. As a matter of fact, when Smithers' father died saving Springfield, it was Mr. Burns who took him in as an infant and raised him. Even if it does make Smithers' strong feelings about Burns a little odd in context, it's an incredibly generous act. It's clear that he cares about Smithers and will do anything to keep him in his life. In the alternate ending to Who Shot Mr. Burns, in which Smithers was the one who shot him, Mr. Burns only gives him a 5% pay cut, as opposed to him being willing to have the infant Maggie Simpson arrested.
I'm giving you a 5% pay cut.
That is a ludicrously forgiving act by his standards. His care for Smithers is by far the closest Mr. Burns has ever come to being a truly decent man, making it an easy choice for the gold medal of good. But now it's time to go from saying Burns to Boo-Earns to talk about the evil deeds. And trust us, there are plenty. If you wrote them all down, it'd probably make a 3-hour video. We'll start with the earliest chronological deed in this section, abandoning his family. Remember earlier when we talked about Mr. Burns abandoning his teddy bear Bobo? Well, that wasn't his only sin that fateful day. Little Happy Montgomery Burns was sadly blinded by greed from a very young age, leaving both his parents and Bobo to live with his heartless billionaire grandfather. While this is far from the most malicious deed on Burns' record, especially given that he was only a young child, it's significant in that it really foreshadows the heartless billionaire Mr. Burns himself would grow up to be. One of many examples of that man is one of his favorite hobbies, releasing the hounds. In one of the series' most memorable running gags, Mr. Burns' hounds are released anytime there's a threat or inconvenience or really anything on Mr. Burns' property.
Release the hounds.
There's nothing wrong with having guard dogs as security, but often Mr. Burns uses these as punishments for employees and even threats to outsiders. It's violent, it's generally an overreaction, and it endangers pretty much everyone he's in contact with, and it's not even close to his lowest moral point. Mr. Burns is also one of the few people who can make a heartfelt moment mean-spirited in the right context. The words, "Don't forget, you're here forever," will bring most Simpsons fans' minds to the iconic "Do It For Her" image, one of the sweetest and most memorable moments in the entire series. Homer might have turned this cruel sign into something that motivates and cheers him up with pictures of little Maggie, but that doesn't take away from Burns' pettiness and downright cruelty, and kicking the desperate Homer while he's down by putting the mean-spirited sign up in his office.
You're here forever.
It's not like you're paying him that much anyway, Mr. Burns. He might be greedy and selfish, but Burns actually does want to share his wealth with his heirs, which led to him manipulating Bart. After a near-death experience thanks to a terribly deadly bathtub, Mr. Burns decides it's time to start thinking about where exactly his fortune goes whenever he goes. Resultantly, he chooses Bart as an heir for his mischievous nature, forcing the boy to choose between his own family and an extravagant but heartless billionaire.
Excellent. Excellent.
When he learns it's unlikely that Bart will make the same choice as he did as a young Monty Burns, he fakes a recording of Bart's family talking about how glad they are to have him out of their hair and Homer's near bald head. Trying to take a child away from his family to make him your heir is already questionable, but tack on falsely convincing him that his family hates him, and you've got a really monstrous act of psychological manipulation. And that's not the only time Burns has tried to drive a wedge between the Simpson family. Hitting on Marge is next. When Marge gets a job at the nuclear power plant, Mr. Burns is head over heels right away, showering her with gifts and attention. Unfortunately, upon discovering she's married to Homer, Burns goes full nice guy mode, and not like Ned Flanders nice guy, more like Reddit nice guy. He fires her over having a husband, makes sexual comments towards her, and Marge rightly takes this to court.
You don't have to sue me to get my pants off.
The only thing that keeps this from being any higher is Burns' change of heart once he sees how strong of a relationship Homer and Marge have. It doesn't change the fact that he was willing to ruin an employee and his spouse's lives just for being married, but it at least has a much more positive ending than most of the deeds that follow. Now we have Mr. Burns' overall treatment of his employees. As a boss, Mr. Burns is, how do you describe it? Think Mr. Krabs minus the semi-fatherly relationship he has with his employees. Also, amp general endangerment of his employees up to 11. Burns blatantly neglects safety guidelines, uses whatever level of violence against them he deems necessary to get them out of his hair, including trapdoors and the aforementioned hound releasing, and sees his employees' rights as expendable at worst and necessary burdens at best. There are a few exceptions, like when he paid for Homer's liposuction surgery when he became too obese to work, but while those moments keep this entry from being any higher, his total disregard for the heart and soul of his empire is still one of his most consistent bad deeds. We aren't in the bottom half, and we're already talking about Burns hitting Bart with his car. Okay, not on purpose, but he sure didn't seem overly concerned about it. When Burns hit Bart with his car, he not only showed minimal concern for his well-being, but his only offer of restitution to the family was $100, barely enough to cover his hospital bills. We can't put this deed any higher since it wasn't intentional, and Burns at least tried to pay the bill, but that doesn't change the fact that he felt no guilt over hitting a child with his car and was only concerned with protecting his image with as little money spent as possible. Ultimately, he wins the case and doesn't give the Simpsons anything, just in case you mistook his offer as generosity. Finding his bad deeds is easier than taking candy from a baby, which is next, ironically. Usually this would just be an expression, but now Mr. Burns literally tried to take a lollipop from a baby to celebrate the success of an evil plan that we'll definitely get to later, by the way.
It would be like taking candy from a baby.
Unlike the aforementioned tug-of-war for Bobo's affection, Burns doesn't have any moment of redemption for his actions. He just did one of the most stereotypical evil deeds in the book, and he did it so casually. This is about as on the nose as evil gets, and we've still got a lot to go. You might be wondering if there's any redeeming Mr. Burns, and if you are wondering, the old man and Elisa answered that question with a resounding no, with him intentionally killing sea life. If anyone in Springfield could try and place Mr. Burns on the right path, it'd have to be Lisa Simpson. When Mr. Burns loses everything, he begs Lisa for help to get back on his feet, and she agrees on the condition of him losing his evil ways. Initially, when he opens a recycling plant made out of entirely recycled material, Mr. Burns seemed to have changed, but unfortunately, we can't forget the best part according to him, the animal slurry made with sea life, captured with plastic drink rings and ground into edible paste.
It's made from 100% recycled animals.
Even losing everything and building it back up doesn't change Mr. Burns. While we give him some credit for being genuinely thankful to Lisa for her advice, he really didn't take too long to grow back into his old heartless self. And what if we told you his attacks on sea life gets even worse, like trying to kill baby sea turtles? In the episode, The Full Monty, Mr. Burns loses heart. Well, he didn't really have one. Mr. Burns loses lungs after he learns he's going to die soon, which leads to him sadly attempting to take his own life. This in and of itself is sad, but the way he goes about it erases any sympathy we would have had. Burns insists that he must go out on his own terms by jumping off a cliff where baby sea turtles are migrating to take out as many of them as possible. It's a perfect example of how cartoonishly evil Mr. Burns is. Even when he loses all hope for his life, all he wants to do is hurt innocent animals. And as far as that goes, it doesn't get much worse than Burns harnessing his inner Cruella and trying to kill puppies. How someone could have the heart to hurt even one puppy is beyond me, but apparently it's not too crazy to Mr. Burns, who is fully ready to kill 25, minus Little Monty, cruelty to make a tuxedo for his collection of clothing made of animal skin. This desire is strong enough to make Burns steal the 25 puppies from the Simpson family and to hold Bart and Lisa hostage and even threaten to kill them so his plans can succeed.
I'll have to kill them all.
The only reason we don't place this even higher is that it's one of the rare occasions where Burns learns a valuable lesson. When all the puppies adorably stand up like 25 adorable little Rory Calhoun greyhounds, he vows to never kill any animal or wear its skin if it can do an amusing trick. Look man, our standards are really low here. Just like Homer's standards are when it comes to how his boss treats him, which is our next entry, his treatment of Homer Simpson. We can name countless instances of Burns' horrid treatment of any of his employees, but lovable dummy Homer Simpson is his favorite target. He takes advantage of Homer's stupidity pretty often, whether it's to reach his own evil purposes or simply for his own amusement.
Time for Monkey to shine.
The episode, Homer vs. Dignity, is arguably the most memorable example of the latter, at least. When Burns hires Homer as his prank monkey, he has him dress as a panda and infiltrate the zoo to dance for onlookers, so it seems. Or be, how to say this without losing an ad revenue, canoodled by a panda against his will. Infamous scenes in Simpsons history. And while that's one of the worst things he's put Homer through, his consistent cruelty towards him lands the pair's toxic relationship near the bottom of our list. Unfortunately, our bronze medal of evil goes to a scene between Mr. Burns' closest thing to a healthy relationship, his coping mechanism in the Simpsons movie. While Mr. Burns plays a secondary role in the Simpsons movie, acting as a minor antagonist and refusing to provide power for Springfield during outages, he still makes an impact, and karma hits him when the citizens of Springfield loot his mansion during its would-be apocalypse. In a mid-credit scene, we see Mr. Burns give Smithers a suggestion that might cheer him up, killing himself. Smithers, I don't believe in suicide, but if you would care to try it, it might cheer me up to watch. Yeah, this man just suggested to his closest friend and most trusted associate to literally take his own life just on the off chance that it might make him feel better. And remember, this guy is the one whose connection to Burns has the gold medal of evil. If you weren't already convinced Mr. Burns was pure evil, this scene should do the trick. Even so, he gets worse. Our silver medal of evil goes to the murder attempt on Bart and Abe Simpson. One of Mr. Burns' most memorable deeds goes back to his service alongside Grandpa Abe in World War II. While we could technically count that as a good deed, he also stole priceless paintings and entered a pact with his fellow servicemen that whoever was the last of them alive would get all the paintings. Unsurprisingly, the pact means nothing to Burns, and he gets greedier than usual. When he and Abe are the only two remaining, he tries to kill him to ensure the paintings are his to claim.
Smithers, I want that man killed.
It's not too shocking for Mr. Burns to attempt to kill Abe via an assassin, but he also tries to kill Bart later when he helps Abe steal the paintings, narrowly being saved by his grandpa. Child murder is just about the worst crime someone can commit, and Burns did it at the slightest inconvenience just to make sure he'd be even richer than he already was. But when a moment is so heinous it causes Smithers to refuse an order from Mr. Burns, like blocking out the sun, it has to take the gold medal of evil. Later described by Smithers as the moment his boss went from everyday villainy to cartoonish supervillainy, Burns' most powerfully money-hungry plot came from the Who Shot Mr. Burns special. He resolves to block out the sun from Springfield, knowing full well it will kill plant life, hurt the ecosystem in general, and deprive the city of heat.
Take one last look at the sun, Springfield.
But nonetheless, Burns has no qualms, for the simple reason that people will be using power constantly, which means he'll be getting money constantly. Smithers hit the nail on the head. This is cartoonish evil in its purest form. Mr. Burns doesn't see anything as off limits when it comes to earning money, even though he's already got a ludicrous amount of it. You tried to do the right thing, Maggie, but hopefully you at least scared Mr. Burns off of doing anything like this ever again.
I'd love to chitty chat, but tonight's the night I do my charity work.
Whether you love him or hate him for his goody two-shoes nature, it's hard to deny that Ned Flanders is just about the nicest guy in Springfield. Maybe one of the nicest guys in cartoon history. He's the yin to Mr. Burns' yang. While he does have some moments that show character flaws and moral fallacies, he's overall a total sweetheart who's always got the best of intentions. Well, usually. Hey diddly ho, neighborinos. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and these are Ned Flanders' Diddly Idly Eats, Good to Evil. Now, for the most part, Ned's character is pretty much the embodiment of a good Christian man. So he has done a lot of good, and we mean a lot. So we've chosen only the most Christ-like of all. These are Ned's good deeds. To kick things off, let's talk about Ned's devotion to his family. Homer Simpson, well-intentioned though he may be, is far from the ideal family man, which is, in part, a reason for his envy of his next diddly-door neighbor. Where Homer is neglectful, lazy, self-centered, and often downright mean, Ned is incredibly gentle and loving towards his family. Whatever the situation, Ned does his best to keep his family's hopes high, like when his business venture, the Leftorium, goes under, and he keeps his children's spirits up even though they're having to sleep in a car. While he can be a bit overly protective of them, it's clear that Ned is devoted to keeping his children and wife safe and happy at all costs. In one episode, he tearfully recounts an instance of him drunkenly calling Ann Landers, a fictional character, a quote, boring old biddy, as him being more animal than man. And that was over a decade ago. Just forgive yourself already, Ned. Being mean to a fictional character one time doesn't take away from your qualities as a family guy. And that even extends to other families, like being a father figure to Bart in the Simpsons movie. Honestly, we really ought to give a whole separate entry to that beautiful hot chocolate he made for Bart. Just look at that blowtorched marshmallow, the candy wafer, the chocolate shavings. There's a whole Binging with Babish episode on it for a reason, but anyway, the deed. When Bart is sick of Homer's neglectful behavior in the theatrical film, Ned steps up to give Bart some much-needed positive guidance and fatherly support. Ned was willing to not only offer Bart some hot chocolate, but to take him on a fishing trip, genuinely disheartened that Homer had never done the same for him.
Does your dad ever take you fishing?
Not traditionally, at least, considering that Ned often shows concern on Bart's influence on his own children. The fact that he's willing to take him under his wing is even more admirable. He's looking out for all the families around him, not just his own, and that is a sign of a truly good neighbor. On that note, let's give our Bronze Medal of Good to Ned's constant status as the ideal neighbor to The Simpsons. If there's anything that illustrates Ned's Christ-like turn-the-other-cheek mentality, it's his abundant patience for Homer and the Simpson family in general, despite Homer's constant insulting and mistreatment of him. Ned is an incredibly passive man, attempting to befriend Homer often and showing great generosity and grace towards him. One common example is his habit of letting Homer frequently borrow equipment from him, only to pretty much never return it. The absolute most Flanders will ever do in rebuttal towards this is to ask him nicely to return his borrowed stuff, and he won't even get mad if he refuses. It's shown on several occasions that Ned has his limits with Homer. In Homer Loves Flanders, he grows to dislike Homer after he becomes annoyingly clingy after the two attend a football game together. And in Hurricane Neddy, Ned calmly describes Homer as the worst man he's ever met. With these two moments considered, it's clear that Ned has to make a genuine effort to be kind to Homer, and while he does often falter, it's impressive that he wants anything to do with Homer, let alone being a great friend to him.
You are the worst human being I have ever met.
In one episode, he outbid Mr. Burns to buy the Simpsons' house, so he could become their landlord, or landowner since there's only one lord, and he acted as a great owner, even repairing his newly acquired property while the Simpsons lived there. Heck, when Homer wrote an entire song dedicated to roasting him, the guy absolutely loved it, to the point of cranking it up when it came on the radio. And Ned is also practically a free bodyguard, as there have been multiple instances of him saving Homer's and others' life, a deed that definitely earns him the Silver Medal of Good. Ned is a man who's always ready to put others before himself, while many dislike the purely religious zealot he's become in later seasons. His original characterization was always to put his money where his mouth is. Ned is always willing to risk his neck to help others, one example being in the episode Homer the Heretic, when he saves his neighbor from a burning household, despite the blatant danger.
He'd have done the same for me.
He's also an altruist in general when it comes to this, from catching Mrs. Krabappel when she falls from a ladder, to saving Homer again with bulletproof glass, when he nearly gets shot on a bounty hunting job. Being willing to put your life in danger to save someone else is admirable even one time, but Ned's done it more than his fair share. Sticking to Ned's religion, he would probably cite Jesus' words in the Christian Bible, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And for our Gold Medal of Good, Ned does this quite literally by letting everyone use his bomb shelter. You would be hard-pressed to find a character as purely selfless as Ned Flanders. In the episode Bart's Comet, when a comet is discovered hurtling towards Springfield, Ned generously allows the entirety of Springfield into his bomb shelter, despite leaving him and his family totally cramped.
So I built the shelter big enough for both our families.
As if this wasn't generous enough, when it's decided by his fellow townspeople that one person has to leave leave so the door can close, and that one person is chosen to be Flanders. He obliges, willingly sacrificing himself so that everyone else in Springfield can live on. He had every right to be upset, and to at least somewhat defend himself, but he really channels his inner savior here and peacefully walks off to let his friends live on, fully expecting to die. He even asks his son, Todd, to shoot him if he tries to come back in, showing just how serious he was about his self-sacrifice. Side note, where did Todd get a shotgun? Thankfully, the comet doesn't destroy Springfield, being quite tiny, and Ned's friends all join him to willingly die alongside him if need be. Here, Ned extinguished any doubt that he was truly a good man, earning this deed the gold medal of good. But, as good as Neddy is, he is not entirely innocent. He does have a darker side and some bad deeds under his belt. We begin with one of Ned's many conversion attempts throughout Springfield, trying to baptize Bart and Lisa. We want to start by saying that there's nothing wrong with Ned trying to share his religion with others. In general, he's a genuinely good Christian who pretty much always means well, even if he is rather stereotypical. But there are times where Ned can act inappropriately towards others from his faith, even if he does mean well. A good example is in the episode Home Diddly Dum Doodly, incredible name by the way, in which Ned takes the Simpsons children into his home as a foster parent when Homer and Marge are pronounced unfit parents, until they pass a mandatory parenting class. For the most part, Ned is a loving surrogate parent to the three Simpsons kids, but he does falter when he realizes none of the kids are baptized, prompting him to take them to the lake to baptize them himself. Whatever your stance on baptism is, we don't think most people would disagree with us when we say that it's the parent's choice whether or not to go through with it. And considering Ned actually knows Marge and Homer personally, being close friends with them, it's very disrespectful to them as parents. With that said, let's talk about one of the more unintentionally cathartic moments in Simpsons history: punching Homer in the face. Yes, really, this does happen in the season 24 episode Black Eyed Please. We see here a very rare instance of Ned losing his temper. Now, anyone who's watched a single episode of The Simpsons probably thinks that Ned giving Homer a little knuckle sandwich isn't too big of a deal. In fact, it's pretty tame compared to everything Homer has put him through over the years. And this was 10 seasons ago, mind you, so there's probably more on the big guy's record. We have to feel some sympathy for Ned, not only considering this dynamic between the two, but also his dynamic between his parents, who consider him a total drag and prefer the company of Homer, who gladly gets stoned and joins in their teasing of him. To be clear though, as much as we feel for Ned here, it doesn't justify punching someone in the face, especially not hard enough to give him the minor injuries Homer suffered.
If I'm not as good as you, then I'm horrible.
That said, we also can't put this any higher since he spent the rest of the episode trying desperately to make up for what he did, even if he was partially just concerned with keeping up the image he had as the better man. That said, Homer certainly has gotten Ned into his fair share of trouble. Take their trip to Las Vegas, for instance, where Homer's bad influence leads Ned to getting incredibly drunk and marrying a waitress, a deed that earns the bronze medal of bad or evil. Yes, Ned Flanders, the closest thing in Springfield to a truly upright citizen, has technically committed adultery. It's hard to think of something more out of character, but after getting extremely drunk with Homer, the two end up waking up to realize to their horror that they've married waitresses they met the night before. He really should have stayed away from the blackberry schnapps, if getting drunk just once made him do that after all. Thankfully, the two managed to escape Vegas, actually kicked out of Vegas, forbidden to return, and we can't get too mad at Ned, since he obviously didn't consciously want to cheat on his wife. But still, this is a pretty blatant mark on his record. We hope that it doesn't lead to an awkward conversation between him and Maude in heaven. Speaking of, later on, Ginger actually returned to her lawful husband in Springfield, this being after Maude passed away, and Ned reluctantly tried to make their relationship work. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at it, she leaves upon realizing the family seems too good for her and her lifestyle.
I can't take it! You're too goody-goody!
It's good that Ned at least tried to make things right by accepting the woman he mistakenly married, but the whole drunkenness and adultery combo thing is something you can't skim past. And speaking of sinfulness, our silver medal of evil has to go to Ned's Flanderization. Normally, we wouldn't be so on the nose in a list like this, but considering how hard it is to find anything bad Ned has done, not to mention the fact that this term was literally named after him, we think an exception can be made. For those unaware, Flanderization is is a term referring to the tendency of long-running shows to take a once notable trait of a character and make it their entire personality.
They'll be Flanders.
Take Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob as one example. His greed was once a humorous aspect of a more complete character, but it's become his entire personality in later seasons. There are many other examples of the term, but Ned Flanders is pretty much the man who unintentionally invented it. His original characterization was a good man who happened to be a Christian, the embodiment of love thy neighbor as yourself and then some. But in later seasons, Christianity has come to define Ned's entire personality, which can lead to him being intolerant and discriminatory of other religions and beliefs, from working overtime to get evolution banned from schools and museums, to making several offensive comments about other religions. It's clear that Ned is a man who's not hesitant to beat others over the head with his Bible. His most egregious sin in this territory is his tendency to shelter his kids, Rod and Todd, not caring that they're complete social outcasts, and on one occasion sending Todd to live with the Simpsons when he starts to lose his faith over depression from his mother's past death. That's just seriously messed up, Ned. Classic Ned would have consoled his son through his grief, and never would have dreamed of kicking him out. That said, as horrible as Ned can be in later seasons, we have to at least blame some of that on bad writing. It feels only right to give the gold medal of evil to something Ned did even in his original years. So our top spot has to go to the iconic episode Hurricane Nettie. This episode is a fan favorite, and probably the most memorable story revolving around our favorite Ned Diddley-Aber. Unfortunately, it's also by far the most blatantly negative light we've seen him in. You know, one of those memes with the Joker on it that always says something like, when a nice guy loses his patience, the devil shivers? That meme pretty much sums up Ned's behavior in this episode pretty much perfectly. We've seen throughout this list that Ned is generally the most generous, selfless, and passive man in Springfield. But even the most kind-hearted man has his limits, and when a hurricane destroys his home, he starts to grow frustrated. Why would God target him? He's done everything the Bible says, even the stuff that contradicts the other stuff. The other residents of Springfield band together to try and rebuild his home, but despite their good intentions, the house that Love built breaks almost immediately, causing Ned to go off on the entire town. He roasts pretty much everyone, men, women, children, even Lenny, who he doesn't even know. There's even a deleted scene where he calls Milhouse Four Eyes despite he himself wearing glasses. While we can't blame Ned for losing his temper to an extent, here we saw him absolutely tear the people of Springfield apart when they were all actually well-intentioned for once.
Hey buddy, got a quarter?
We discover in this episode that Ned was a terribly behaved child until his awful parents took him to see a psychiatrist, whose solution was perpetually spanking him until he stopped behaving badly. The fact that Ned's immediate reaction to his breakdown was checking himself into a mental hospital is proof that he's still a good man, despite being pushed to his limits. But this is by far the most openly mean Ned Flanders has ever been. These are 11 times that The Simpsons was censored. Starting out our list, we have Homer's drug use in Weekend at Burnsies. In the season 13 episode titled Weekend at Burnsies, Homer falls into addiction after overusing the drug that was medically prescribed to him. Despite the success it brings him at work, the drug's other consequences are quite negative for Homer, which becomes so alarming that his family gets concerned as well. Although this episode received a TV-14 rating here in the US, Fox decided to tone back the severity of Homer's drug use. Whether it was because the studio felt the subject matter might promote drug abuse,
Homie, you don't need drugs anymore.
Or it just hit a little close to home regarding some of our society's drug issues, it ended up being heavily edited. The UK was even more uncomfortable airing the episode, and hence it was banned in the region for years. Today, viewers can probably find the episode, but it still holds its uncut status. Another censored episode of The Simpsons features gun use in the Cartridge family. Besides drug abuse, another aspect of The Simpsons that attracted censorship was the depiction of gun use in the season 9 episode, The Cartridge Family. After witnessing a wild soccer riot in town, Homer decides to purchase a handgun in order to protect his family.
I'd like to buy your deadliest gun, please.
However, he fails to handle the weapon correctly and ends up treating it like a toy in a highly irresponsible manner. In fact, during one scene, Homer casually points the gun at Marge's face as if it's no big deal. Later on, Bart repeats the act with Milhouse when the two quote-unquote play. Homer's reckless gun use was a bit of a red flag for censors, which they felt could have led to disastrous consequences. For this reason, the TV channel Sky One went ahead with banning this episode entirely, while the US rebroadcasts still continue to omit the two most concerning gunplay scenes. Next up, we have the depiction of Rio de Janeiro in Blame It on Lisa. Another Simpsons episode that seldomly airs due to its controversy is Season 13's Blame It on Lisa. It sees the Simpsons heading to Brazil in search of the South American orphan that Lisa sponsors when they learned the child goes missing. The plot is set in Brazil's second most populous city, Rio de Janeiro. Despite the episode's intentions, it depicted Rio quite negatively, which, quite frankly, is hard to ignore. Most of the plot revolves around Homer being held for ransom due to a lack of safety in the city. Rio is also shown to be a center of crime, slum areas, and rat infestations. Some argued that the episode failed to represent Brazilian culture accurately, mixing it with that of other Latin American countries. So it makes sense that the tourist board of Rio de Janeiro was quite furious with the Simpsons episode and even threatened to sue the creators of the show. Although those charges were later dropped after an official apology, Blame It on Lisa is still a heavily censored episode. Next up is a disturbing scene of suicide bombing in Day of Jackanapes. This season 12 episode follows Sideshow Bob's release from prison, after which he attempts hypnotizing Bart to kill Krusty the Clown. Bob's inhumane murder plan was already disturbing enough, yet the episode still took things a bit too far when it showed Bart blowing himself up while wearing a suicide vest. The scene was definitely dark, disturbing, and even triggering for some viewers, which is why Sky One decided to drop this episode entirely from 2002 to 2004. Moving on, we have the offensive jokes in Cape Fear. It must have been hard to be a Simpsons fan in Germany during the 90s, since one of the show's all-time best episodes was skipped in the rotation. Aired in 1993, Cape Fear is the second episode of Season 5, and features the return of Sideshow Bob to Springfield for revenge against Bart for exposing his murder plot. Simpsons fans know there's a lot to appreciate in this episode. In fact, in 2003, Entertainment Weekly named it the third greatest episode in the show's entire history. So, what set Germany off? Well, it was McBain's stand-up material at the start of the episode that had the episode banned in Germany. It turns out the jokes were just too much for the country. The next episode displays heavy graphic violence in Treehouse of Horror 27. The Simpsons annual Halloween specials, aka the Treehouse of Horror segments, involve some of the most intense displays of violence in the series. One of these installments, Treehouse of Horror 27, seemingly attempts to showcase way more violence than the sitcom was allowed to. It's also the 600th episode, which may be why the show's creators carelessly went overboard. This episode had more violence than apparently some could handle, specifically during the BFF RIP and Mo Finger segments. As a result, this Halloween episode was taken off schedule for the New Zealand network TVNZ. Next, we have Homer offending the Russian Orthodox Church in Looking for Mr. Goodbart. While some of the show's episodes were censored due to their graphic or violent content, others became controversial due to disrespect or offense towards a particular culture. One such episode is Season 28's Looking for Mr. Goodbart. While hinting at the popular Pokemon Go phenomenon, it follows Homer's obsession with the mobile app's parody called Pokemon Get. He's eventually shown playing the game in the church, which was perceived as an attack on the Russian Orthodox Church.
Look, this game is, or at least was, bigger than Jesus.
For this reason, the Russian broadcast network, 2X2, banned the Simpsons episode altogether. The Simpsons faced a massive backlash for defaming New Orleans in A Streetcar Named Marge. A Streetcar Named Marge is an episode from Season 4 and highlights Homer and Marge reaching a delightful common ground. However, the episode is still notorious due to a song that describes New Orleans negatively. The peppy musical number is from a movie called Oh, Streetcar, for which Marge auditions and gets a role. The name of the movie and this episode's entire title is an obvious reference to the 1951 movie A Streetcar Named Desire. Perhaps this is what the show wanted to fixate the spotlight on, but the sarcastic song pointing towards New Orleans, another episode was censored for coinciding with the news on the Washington sniper, and Wild Bart's Can't Be Broken. Some instances of censorship can be caused by unfortunate timing. Even if an aspect of the plot is not intentionally offensive, it can be viewed in a whole different light when recent events add another context. A major example is the season 10 episode Wild Bart's Can't Be Broken, which depicts an interesting interaction between Springfield's youth and adults. When the town's children are blamed for wrecking the grounds and indoors of the local elementary school, Chief Wiggum imposes a strict sunset curfew on them. In the same episode, there was some dialogue that made BBC Two postpone its premiere and set it aside from consideration.
Yeah, that sniper at the All-Star game was a blessing in disguise.
In Wiggum's dialogue, any child found outside after dark will be shot, later became an issue amidst the Washington sniper attacks in October of 2002.
Any kid caught on the street after dark will be shot.
The show has a track record of occasionally offending countries, and it happened again because of a seizure scene in 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. In this season 10 episode, the Simpsons take a last-minute holiday to Tokyo after going on a budget and saving plenty. Later, however, they end up losing all their money, which eventually leaves them with no option but to participate in a dangerous Japanese game show in exchange for the airfare back home. The episode doesn't shy away from pointing out every Japanese stereotype you could possibly think of, and it's safe to say the show crossed the line during one scene. In one part of the episode, Homer and others willfully induce seizures via anime as a means of relaxing, which was apparently very offensive for Japanese viewers. So it comes as no surprise that channels in Japan completely disapproved of the Simpsons episode by banning it. They even refused to include it in their official season 10 DVD set. Finally, we have an episode of The Simpsons that was about the World Trade Center in the city of New York versus Homer Simpson. One of the biggest cases of censorship on The Simpsons was this season 9 episode. It aired 4 years before the devastating 9/11 attacks. Due to the main plot being centered around the World Trade Center, the episode was later removed in the United States from 2001 to 2006. Although some TV networks began to air the episode again, the British channel, Sky One, did not do so until 2005. The station made several cuts to remove some scenes,
That guy, they stick all the jerks in Tower 1.
especially the one involving the dialogue. They stick all the jerks in Tower 1. This episode was among the most prominent ones that was censored, but given the fact that it was made several years before the actual attack, it was obviously all just a coincidence.